She woke up in the hospital. No memory of who she was, no name, no face visible through the glass. Her former fiancé looked the doctor straight in the eye and said, "I've never met this woman." His family called her a fraud. She was about to be thrown out onto the streets as a homeless person until the hospital doors opened. A man all of Chicago feared walked in and said only one thing: "She belongs to my family." But why? Who was he? And her lost memories, were they more terrifying than the truth? If you want to follow the story to the end, like the video now and comment the city you're watching in. Let me know how far this story has come. Let's begin. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up. Rain hammered the glass in sheets so thick the city vanished behind it, and Sienna Vale gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles bone white, her breathing shallow and fast. The flash drive sat in the cup holder beside her like a grenade, with the pin already pulled. 16 gigabytes. That's all it took to hold a family's worth of felonies, wire fraud, shell corporations, forged municipal contracts stretching back 11 years. She'd found it buried in Colton's personal server, tucked inside a folder labeled Wedding Vendors. The irony would have been funny if her hands would stop shaking. She'd been sitting cross-legged on the floor of their shared office 2 hours ago, her wedding binder open on her lap, searching for the florist's updated invoice. Colton had left his laptop unlocked on the desk. She wouldn't have touched it. She never touched it. Except the notification that pinged wasn't from a vendor. It was from his father. 2 words in the subject line: "Clean it." Sienna was an architect. She understood structures, how they were built, how they held weight, how they collapsed. What she found inside that laptop was a structure designed to never be seen. Layer after layer of fraudulent transactions routed through shell companies with names that sounded like daycare centers and community nonprofits. Money flowing in from overseas accounts, washing through Victor Mercer's real estate developments, and landing clean in investment portfolios that funded half the luxury condos on the Chicago waterfront. She copied everything. She didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. Now she was driving across the Eisenhower Bridge in a storm that turned the road into a river. Her phone dead because she'd yanked the battery out when Colton's numbers started flashing on the screen. And the only plan she had was to reach the FBI field office on West Roosevelt before anyone realized what she'd taken. The headlights behind her appeared suddenly, too bright, too close. She adjusted the rear-view mirror, a black SUV, no plates she could see through the rain. It was gaining fast, eating the distance between them with the kind of purpose that had nothing to do with traffic. Sienna pressed the accelerator. The tires slipped on the wet asphalt and the car fishtailed before the traction caught. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She checked the mirror again. The SUV was closer now, close enough that its headlights flooded her entire cabin with white light. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, come on, come on." The impact came from the right rear quarter panel. Not a tap. A full-force strike that lifted the back end of her car off the road and sent it spinning. The steering wheel ripped out of her hands. The world became noise, metal shrieking against metal, glass shattering inward, the guardrail crumpling like foil as the car punched through it and launched into open air over the dark water below. She didn't scream. There wasn't time. The last thing she registered before the water swallowed everything was the flash drive bouncing off the dashboard and disappearing into the dark. Then nothing. The fluorescent lights were the first thing. Not warm, not gentle. The kind of flat institutional white that made everything look like it was already dead. Sienna opened her eyes and immediately closed them again. Her skull felt like someone had taken a ball-peen hammer to it from the inside. Every breath pulled at something sharp in her left side. Cracked ribs, maybe, or worse. Her lips were split and swollen, and the taste in her mouth was copper and antiseptic. She tried to move her right hand. An IV line tugged at the skin. She tried the left, bandaged from wrist to elbow. She opened her eyes again, slower this time, and stared at the ceiling tiles until they stopped swimming. A woman in scrubs leaned into her field of vision, mid-40s, tired eyes, a name badge that Sienna couldn't focus on. "Can you hear me?" the nurse said. Sienna tried to speak. What came out was a dry rasp, barely human. "Don't force it. You've been intubated. Your throat's going to be raw for a while." The nurse adjusted something on the IV stand. You're at Mercy General. You were pulled out of the river 18 hours ago. Can you tell me your name? Sienna stared at her. The question sat in the air like a foreign object. Her name. She reached for it the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room, and her fingers closed on nothing. There was no name. There was no room. There was just white. A vast, featureless blankness where her entire life was supposed to be. Her voice cracked. I don't know. The nurse's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, something more clinical. She made a note on the chart. That's okay. We're going to run some more tests. You sustained significant head trauma. Memory disruption is common with injuries like yours. It may come back gradually. May, not will. Sienna turned her head toward the window. Rain, still raining, or raining again. She had no way to know. The skyline beyond the glass meant nothing to her. A city full of buildings she couldn't name, streets she couldn't picture, people she'd apparently forgotten existed. She pressed her palm flat against the mattress and tried to feel something solid. The man arrived on the second day. Sienna was sitting up by then, propped against pillows, her left arm in a proper sling, her face a patchwork of bruises turning from purple to a sick greenish yellow. She'd been working with a neurologist who asked her the same questions in different orders, and a social worker who spoke in the careful, non-committal tone of someone who dealt with broken people for a living. Nobody had come to claim her. No family, no friends. The police had traced the car to a rental company, which traced the credit card to an account that had been frozen 12 hours after the crash. She was, for all practical purposes, no one. The man walked in without knocking. Tall, well-built, mid-30s. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so carefully emptied of expression. He had the kind of eyes that watched everything and gave back nothing. Behind him, two men in dark overcoats positioned themselves in the hallway. They didn't enter the room. They didn't need to. Their presence was the message. I'm looking for the woman from the bridge, he said. The nurse at the station outside hesitated. Sienna could see her through the open door, her gaze bouncing between the man and the men behind him, calculating something she didn't want to calculate. Are you family? The nurse asked. The man looked at Sienna, looked at her the way you look at something you've been watching for a long time from very far away. His jaw tightened once, briefly, and then smoothed. Yes, he said. He stepped into the room and stopped at the foot of the bed. Didn't sit. Didn't reach for her hand. Didn't perform any of the rituals that visitors were supposed to perform. He just stood there and looked at her. And there was something behind his eyes that she couldn't read. Not warmth, exactly, but something heavier. Something that had weight. My name is Luca De Luca, he said. I know you don't remember me. That's all right. I'm going to make sure no one touches you again. Sienna's pulse ticked up on the monitor beside the bed. She didn't know this man. She didn't know anyone. But her body understood danger on a level that didn't require memory, and everything about this man, the controlled stillness, the silent men in the hallway, the way the nurse had instinctively stepped back, told her he was the most dangerous thing in this building. How do you know me? She said. That's a longer conversation. He glanced at the monitor, then back at her. Right now, what matters is that someone tried to kill you 2 nights ago, and the people who should be protecting you are the ones who did it. I don't understand. You will. He pulled a chair from the corner of the room, set it beside the bed, and sat down. He didn't lean forward. He didn't soften his posture. He sat the way a man sits when he's done leaving. The doctor says your memory loss is likely temporary, he said. Maybe days, maybe weeks. While you're waiting for it to come back, you have 2 options. You stay here, get discharged with no name and no ID, and spend tonight in a city that's already trying to bury you. Or you come with me. To where? My home. Why would I go anywhere with a man I don't know? Because the men who ran you off that bridge know exactly where you are, and they're not going to wait for you to remember what you saw. Sienna stared at him. The monitor beeped steadily. The rain tapped against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and no one answered it. What did I see? She asked. Luca's expression didn't change. That's what they're afraid you'll remember. Colton Mercer arrived 40 minutes later, and Sienna hated him on sight. She didn't know why. She had no memory of his face, his name, or the 2 years she'd apparently spent sharing his bed. But when he walked through the door, sandy-haired, square-jawed, dressed in the kind of understated wealth that whispered instead of shouted, something in her chest clenched like a fist. Not fear, not recognition, something uglier, something that lived below language. He brought a lawyer. The lawyer was a compact man in rimless glasses named Dressler. He stood slightly behind Colton and to the left, holding a leather folder, and his presence in the room changed the air the way a drop temperature changes the surface of a lake. Colton stopped when he saw Luca. His mouth opened and closed, then he turned to the nurse. "I need to speak with the patient's attending physician," he said. His voice was controlled, but there was something brittle underneath it. "There's been a misunderstanding." "You know this woman?" the nurse said. Colton didn't look at Sienna. He looked at a point slightly above her head, the way you avoid looking at roadkill. "I've never seen her before in my life." The words landed like a slap. Sienna felt them in her stomach, a physical sensation, not an emotional one. She watched Colton's profile and searched for something, anything, that would contradict what he'd just said. But memory gave her nothing, just the same white void and the distant, aching sense that she'd been here before, in this exact posture, watching a man choose himself over her and calling it necessity. Luca hadn't moved from his chair. He watched Colton the way a predator watches something too small to eat, but too stupid to ignore. "You should think very carefully about what you're doing," Luca said quietly. Colton turned to him. Whatever he saw in Luca's face drained the color from his own, but the lawyer touched his elbow, a tiny, practiced gesture, and Colton steadied. "Mr. DeLuca, I don't know what your interest is in this woman, but my client has no connection to her. Your client was engaged to her 6 days ago." "That's a baseless accusation." "It's a fact. The ring is in her personal effects. His initials are engraved inside the band." Silence. Dressler's fingers tightened on the leather folder. Colton's jaw worked like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. "The ring was reported stolen 3 weeks ago," Dressler said smoothly. "My client filed a police report. This woman is likely a fraud who obtained it through—" "Stop." Luca stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room contracted around him like the walls had taken a step inward. "You're going to walk out of this hospital. You're going to get in your car, and you're going to tell Victor that if anyone from his family comes near this woman again, I will take it personally." Dressler opened his mouth. Colton grabbed his arm. "Let's go," Colton said. They left. The door swung shut behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. Sienna realized she was shaking, not dramatically, a fine, involuntary tremor in her hands that she couldn't stop. She pressed them flat against the blanket and stared at the door. "He knows me," she said. "Yes." "And he just told everyone I'm a stranger." "Yes." She looked at Luca. "Why?" "Because you know something about his family that could put them in prison for the rest of their lives. And dead strangers don't testify." The tremor in her hands got worse. She pressed harder against the blanket. "I need to get out of here," she said. "I know." Luca reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. He dialed a number without looking at the screen. "Bring the car around to the east exit. Service entrance." He paused. "No, not tomorrow. Now." Luca's estate sat on the northern shore of Lake Michigan, 40 minutes outside the city if you drove the way his driver drove. Fast, certain, and with a total disregard for posted speed limits. The house materialized out of the darkness like something from a different century. Stone and timber, 3 stories, set back from the water behind a wall of old-growth oaks that turned the property into a fortress of shadow. Sienna sat in the back seat of the armored sedan and pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to feel something other than the low, grinding panic that had settled into her chest like a second heartbeat. She was leaving a hospital with a man she didn't know, driving to a house she'd never seen, in a body that felt like it belonged to someone else. Every logical instinct told her this was wrong, that trusting a stranger whose name made nurses step back and lawyers stutter was the kind of decision that ended in shallow graves. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was a discharge form with no name on it, and a city full of people who wanted her dead or forgotten, and she couldn't tell the difference between the two. The car stopped. The driver opened her door without a word. The night air hit her face, cold, wet, carrying the iron smell of the lake, and she stepped out onto gravel that crunched under the hospital-issued slippers they'd given her because no one had brought her shoes. The house was quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. The kind of quiet that costs money and planning. Motion-activated lights tracked their path from the driveway to the front door, and Sienna noticed the cameras before she noticed the architecture. Discrete, flush-mounted units positioned at every sightline. Someone had spent serious money making this property invisible and impenetrable at the same time. A woman met them at the door. Late 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled tight, a face that had stopped performing emotions a long time ago. "This is Marta," Luca said. "She runs the house. Anything you need?" you ask her. Marta looked at Sienna the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, clinical, thorough, not unfriendly, but not warm either. "The room upstairs is ready," Marta said. "I'll bring food." "She needs rest first," Luca said. "I'll bring food and she can decide." Luca almost smiled. It happened so fast, Sienna nearly missed it. A flicker at the corner of his mouth that vanished before it fully arrived. He nodded once and turned to Sienna. "The east wing is yours, and second floor. The door locks from the inside. No one will enter without your permission, including me." He held her gaze. "You're not a prisoner here. You can leave whenever you want. But I'd strongly recommend you don't do it tonight." "When will you tell me why you're doing this?" "When you've slept." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." He turned and walked down the hallway toward the west side of the house. His footsteps were silent on the hardwood. The two men from the hospital had taken positions by the front door, and as Luca disappeared around a corner, Marta gestured toward the staircase. "Come," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten since they dragged you out of the water." She was right. The room was large, simply furnished, and overlooked the lake. A bed with clean white sheets, a desk, a chair by the window, a bathroom with a walk-in shower and towels thick enough to sleep on. On the nightstand, someone had placed a glass of water, 2 aspirin, and a sketch pad with a set of mechanical pencils. Sienna stared at the pencils. She didn't know why they made her throat tighten. Marta set a tray on the desk, soup, bread, sliced fruit, and left without small talk. The door clicked shut. Sienna locked it, then checked it twice, then stood in the middle of the room with her arms wrapped around herself and listened to the silence. The lake lapped against the shore outside the window. The house settled around her with small wooden sounds. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. She couldn't tell if it was real or imagined. She sat on the edge of the bed. Then she reached for the sketch pad. Her hand moved before her mind caught up. Lines appeared on the page. Not words, not shapes she recognized, but precise architectural forms. Load-bearing walls, structural joints, cantilever ratios. Her fingers knew the angles. Her wrist knew the pressure. The pencil moved with a fluency that felt older than language. And as the sketch took form, she realized she was drawing a building she'd never consciously seen. A skyscraper. Unfinished. Steel frame exposed against a city skyline. The perspective was from below, looking up through the skeletal structure at a sky that wasn't there yet. She drew for 20 minutes without stopping. When she finally put the pencil down, her hand was cramping, and the page was covered in technical detail that she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. She knew how buildings worked. She knew it the way she knew how to breathe. Automatically, without instruction, without memory. She ate the soup cold, swallowed the aspirin, and lay down on the bed without getting under the covers. The ceiling was white. The rain had stopped. The silence pressed against her like something physical. She closed her eyes and fell into a dream that was half memory and half hallucination. A bridge, rain, headlights, a man's face behind a windshield, not panicked, not angry, but calm. Deliberately calm. The face of someone doing a job. She woke gasping at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around her legs. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She sat up and looked at the sketch pad on the nightstand. The building stared back at her from the page, incomplete and exposed, like a body with its skin removed. She picked up the pencil and started drawing again. But morning came gray and cold. Sienna found clothes laid out on the chair by the window. Not new, but clean and close to her size. Dark jeans, a knit sweater, soft-soled boots. Practical. Chosen by someone who understood that a woman with no past didn't need fashion. She needed armor. She dressed slowly, her cracked ribs protesting every movement, and went downstairs. The kitchen was enormous. Commercial-grade appliances, marble countertops, a long wooden table that could seat 12. Marta was at the stove, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd run this kitchen for decades. Two men Sienna hadn't seen before sat at the far end of the table, eating in silence. They glanced at her when she entered, then went back to their plates. They weren't staff. Staff didn't have that posture, that coiled, ready tension in the shoulders that said they could be on their feet and moving before the chair stopped rocking. Luca was already at the table. He had a cup of black coffee and a newspaper, an actual paper newspaper, not a phone, and he looked like he hadn't slept at all. His shirt was different from last night, but the shadows under his eyes were the same. "Sit," he said. It wasn't an order, it was the way he said everything. Direct, unpadded, stripped of the social cushioning that most people used to make commands sound like suggestions. Sienna sat across from him. Marta placed coffee and toast in front of her without being asked. "I drew something last night," Sienna said. Luca put the paper down. "What?" "A building, a skyscraper, unfinished. I don't know what it is, but I knew every structural detail. The joint specifications, the load paths, the security routing. I couldn't remember my own name, but I could draw a building I've never seen." Something moved behind Luca's eyes. It was fast. A flash of recognition that he immediately buried. "You've seen it," Sienna said. "Yes. What is it?" "It's the Mercer Tower. 42 stories, mixed-use commercial and residential. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of Victor Mercer's real estate portfolio." He paused. "You designed the security systems." The information landed like a dropped weight. Sienna felt it settle into a gap she hadn't known was there, a missing piece clicking into a puzzle she couldn't see. "I worked for him?" "You worked for a firm that contracted with his development company. Your specialty was integrated security architecture set, surveillance systems, access control, automated barriers. You designed the entire internal security network for that building." He picked up his coffee. "You were very good at it. How do you know that?" "Because you also designed mine." The two men at the end of the table had stopped eating. Marta's hands paused on the stove. The kitchen went very still. "I designed your security system?" Sienna said. 3 years ago. Your firm took the contract. You came out here, surveyed the property, and built a custom network from scratch. Cameras, motion sensors, pressure-sensitive perimeter grids, encrypted communication channels. It took you 4 months. He met her eyes. You never knew who you were building it for. The contract was run through a holding company. But you were thorough. More thorough than anyone I'd ever hired. Sienna pressed her palms flat against the table. The wood was cool under her fingers. Real. Solid. "So that's how you know me. I did work for you. That's how I know your work. How I know you is different." "Then tell me." "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because you're not ready to hear it, and I'm not willing to tell it badly." She wanted to push. Every instinct she had left, the ones that didn't require memory, the ones that lived in the gut, told her to press harder, to demand the full truth, to refuse the careful, measured portions he was offering. But she looked at his face and saw something she didn't expect. He was afraid. Not of her. Not of the question. Afraid of the answer. Afraid of what it would change, what it would cost, what it would set in motion. And that fear, more than anything he'd said, told her the truth was bigger than she'd guessed. "Fine," she said. "Then tell me about the Mercers." Luca leaned back in his chair. His coffee sat untouched now, cooling. Victor Mercer built his empire on 2 things: other people's money and other people's silence. His company has been laundering money through real estate developments for over a decade. International accounts routed through shell companies, cleaned through construction contracts, and deposited into investment portfolios that fund the next project. It's circular, self-sustaining, and it touches everything: city contracts, pension funds, union accounts. And I found out. You found the proof. The financial records were embedded in the security network you designed for Mercer Tower. You probably didn't even know they were there at first. The system captured encrypted data streams as part of its standard monitoring protocol. But at some point you decoded them, and you realized what you were looking at. The flash drive. Luca's eyes sharpened. What do you remember? A flash drive. In a car. I was driving somewhere in the rain. It was in the cup holder. She pressed her fingers against her temples. I can see it, but I can't. The rest is just fog. You copied the financial records onto that drive. You were taking them to the FBI when someone ran you off the Eisenhower Bridge. Someone. Victor Mercer. The name landed like a stone in water, and the ripples spread outward through her chest. She didn't remember his face. She didn't remember his voice. But her body remembered something. A tightening in the abdomen. A spike of cortisol. The animal response of a prey animal catching a predator's scent. My fiancé's father tried to kill me. Yes. And Colton watched it happen, or knew it was going to happen and chose not to stop it. The distinction doesn't matter much when you're the one in the river. Sienna closed her eyes. The dream came back. Headlights, rain, a calm face behind glass. Not Colton's face. Older. Harder. The face of a man who made decisions the way accountants made calculations, without emotion, without hesitation, with nothing but the clean arithmetic of self-preservation. The flash drive is gone, she said. It was in the car when I went into the water. Maybe. Maybe not. The car hasn't been fully recovered yet. The FBI is treating it as a traffic accident because that's what the Mercers told them it was. No one's looking for evidence because no one knows there's evidence to find. Except you. Except me. Marta set a fresh cup of coffee in front of Sienna. Their eyes met briefly. Marta's face was unreadable, but there was something in the older woman's posture, a slight incline of the head, a marginal softening of the shoulders, that felt like permission. It's okay to trust him, not because he's good, because he keeps his word. Sienna wrapped her hands around the cup and let the heat seep into her fingers. What happens now? She said. Now we find another copy of that data, and we keep you alive long enough to use it. Another copy? The security network you built for Mercer Tower is still active. The building's unfinished, but the systems are online. They have to be, for insurance purposes. If the encrypted financial data was captured by the monitoring protocol once, it's still stored in the system's archive servers. So we need to access the building. We need you to access the building. You designed the system. You're the only person who knows how to navigate it without tripping the alerts. Sienna stared at him. You want me to break into a building I can't remember designing, bypass a security system I can't remember building, and extract data I can't remember finding, with no memory? Your memory is in your hands. He nodded toward the sketch pad she'd brought downstairs. You drew the building from memory last night. Not cognitive memory, procedural. Your body remembers what your brain forgot. The skills are still there. The knowledge is still there. It's just buried under the trauma. That's not the same as remembering a 16-digit access code. No, but it's a start. She looked down at the sketch pad. The unfinished tower stared back at her, all bones and no skin. Every joint and beam precisely rendered by a hand that moved faster than thought. He was right. The knowledge was in there, locked behind the white wall that separated her from everything she'd ever been. And every time she picked up a pencil, a crack appeared in that wall. She just didn't know what else would come through when it finally broke. The rest of the day passed in pieces. Sienna spent hours at the desk in her room, drawing, not random sketches, systematic, methodical renderings of architectural systems that surfaced from somewhere below consciousness. Floor plans, wiring diagrams, security grid layouts, each one incomplete, each one more detailed than the last, as if her subconscious was feeding her fragments in the order it chose, not the order she needed. By late afternoon, she'd covered 17 pages with technical drawings, and her hand was cramping badly enough that she had to stop. She spread the pages across the bed and stared at them, trying to find a pattern. Some of the drawings were clearly from the same building, the tower, Mercer's tower. She could see the structural skeleton repeating across multiple pages, each one showing a different system layer. Surveillance routing on one page, elevator access control on another, emergency lockdown protocols on a third. But 3 of the drawings were different, smaller in scale, more refined. A residential property, not a commercial one. She picked up one of the pages and carried it to the window. The light was better there, and as she held the drawing up, she realized what she was looking at. This house. Luca's estate. The perimeter grid she'd designed 3 years ago. She'd drawn it perfectly. Every camera position, every sensor node, every blind spot she'd intentionally left in the coverage pattern for operational flexibility. She knew this house, not as a guest, as its architect. And there, in the lower corner of the perimeter layout, she'd drawn something she didn't remember drawing. A secondary access tunnel, running from the basement of the main house to a structure near the lake. A structure she hadn't seen from her window. A structure that didn't appear on any of the other pages. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded the page, put it in her pocket, and went to find Luca. He was in the study on the ground floor, a dark paneled room lined with books that looked like they'd actually been read. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, clipped tone that stopped the moment she entered. "I drew your house," she said. He hung up without saying goodbye. The perimeter grid, the sensor layout, all of it. She pulled the page from her pocket and set it on his desk, including a secondary access tunnel that connects the basement to a structure near the lake, a structure you haven't mentioned. Luca looked at the drawing. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalculation, fast and involuntary. "That tunnel is sealed," he said. "I designed it to be accessible from both ends. Sealed means locked, not removed. It's been decommissioned." "You can't decommission a structural passage. It's part of the foundation. It's there whether you use it or not." She sat in the chair across from his desk. "What's in the building by the lake?" Luca was quiet for a long time. Outside, the afternoon light was dimming toward a premature dusk, and the lake was turning from silver to pewter. "Archive storage," he said finally. "Old records, financial documents, things that need to exist but don't need to be convenient." "Your financial documents?" "Among other things." "Is there anything in that archive that connects to the data I found on the Mercer network?" The pause was longer this time. Luca placed both hands flat on the desk, a gesture that mirrored her own habit, she realized, pressing palms against solid surfaces to anchor herself. "There might be," he said. "The security system you built for me captured the same kind of encrypted traffic that the Mercer system did. I didn't know it at the time. You built redundancies into the architecture that went beyond the scope of the original contract. Backup data capture, encrypted logging, parallel storage streams. You were meticulous. You're saying I accidentally built a surveillance system that recorded your financial activity. I'm saying you built a surveillance system that recorded all network activity within range of the sensors, including financial transmissions that were routed through the property's encrypted channels." He held her gaze. "Including some of mine." The room went very still. "So if I access that archive," Sienna said slowly, "I won't just find evidence against the Mercers. I'll find evidence that could be used against you." "Yes." "And you're telling me this?" "Yes." "Why?" Luca stood up and walked to the window. His reflection appeared in the glass, transparent and dark, superimposed over the fading lake. "Because I made a decision a long time ago about what kind of man I was going to be. I've broken that decision more times than I can count. But not about this. Not about you." "That's not an answer." "It's the only honest one I have." He turned from the window. "You can access the archive whenever you want. I won't stop you. I won't alter what's there. Whatever you find, you find. And whatever you decide to do with it is your choice." Sienna studied his face. She was getting better at reading him, learning the micro-expressions that lived beneath the controlled surface, the slight tension at the corner of his left eye when he was being careful, the way his hand stayed open when he was being honest and closed when he was calculating. His hands were open. "I'll look at it tomorrow," she said. "All right." She stood to leave, At the door, she stopped. Luca? Yes. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, you should know that I don't trust you. Good. But I believe you're not lying to me right now. Something crossed his face that she couldn't name. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was closer to grief. The expression of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and just felt the weight shift without getting lighter. That's enough, he said. She closed the door behind her and walked up the stairs to her room, and the page with the tunnel drawing sat in her pocket like a secret that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to become. The call came at midnight. Sienna wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the desk with the sketchpad open, drawing the same structure over and over. The lakeside building, the access tunnel, the points where her security system interfaced with the main estate's network. Each iteration revealed something new: a junction box she hadn't drawn before, a secondary power feed, a redundant communication line that ran parallel to the main cable but on a different frequency. She was deep in the architecture of a building she couldn't consciously remember when the sound of raised voices drifted up from the ground floor. She set the pencil down and went to the door. The hallway was dark. The motion-activated lights she'd designed were set to half brightness after 11. She knew this without knowing how she knew it. She moved to the top of the staircase and listened. Luca's voice, low and hard. When? Another voice, one she hadn't heard before, male, rougher. 2 hours ago. They moved faster than we expected. How many? 6, maybe more. They're setting up surveillance on the access roads, professional, not local talent. These are out-of-state contractors. Victor's people? Mercer money, but the crew is from Detroit. Somebody made a call. Silence. Then, wake everyone, full perimeter. No one in or out until I give the word. Footsteps. Doors opening and closing. The house shifted from stillness to a state of coiled readiness that Sienna felt in the floor beneath her feet, a vibration, not quite audible, that told her armed men were taking positions at every entrance. She went back to her room and looked out the window. The lake was black. The trees were black. And somewhere out there in the dark between the water and the road, 6 men were watching this house with the patient, methodical focus of people who had been paid to end something. Sienna pressed her palm against the cold glass and felt her heart beating in her fingertips. The tunnel. The archive. The data that could destroy the Mercers and expose whatever Luca DeLuca was hiding behind his carefully constructed honor. She had no memory, no identity, no allies she could verify, and no enemies she could name. But she had 17 pages of architectural drawings that her hands had produced without her brain's permission, and somewhere in those drawings was the answer to a question she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. She picked up the pencil, and in the dark, on the roads surrounding the estate, the headlights went out one by one. The headlights disappeared one by one, and Sienna counted them from her window like a person counting exits they couldn't reach. 6 sets. Maybe more beyond the tree line where the road curved away from the lake. They'd gone dark in sequence, not simultaneously. A practiced move, disciplined, the kind of thing you learned on a job site where noise discipline was enforced with consequences. These weren't desperate men, they were patient ones, which was worse. She turned from the window and looked at the 17 pages spread across her bed. The tunnel. She'd drawn it twice now without intending to. Once in the perimeter layout, once in a closer scale rendering that showed the entry point in the basement. The tunnel ran approximately 40 meters from the main house to the lakeside structure. She'd designed the ventilation herself. She knew the ceiling height, the floor grade, the weight capacity of the access hatch at the far end. She knew all of this the way she knew how to hold a pencil, without choosing to, without remembering learning it. She folded the 2 relevant drawings and tucked them into the back of her waistband. Then she unlocked her door and went downstairs. The house had changed while she was in her room. The ambient quiet of the evening had been replaced by something tighter, more purposeful. She counted 4 men in the ground floor alone, 2 near the front entrance, one at the kitchen window with a radio in his hand, one at the base of the staircase who turned when he heard her coming and reached automatically for something at his hip before recognizing her. "Where's Luca?" she said. The man at the stairs, young, thick-necked, with a jaw like a concrete block, looked her over with the calculating flatness of someone assessing a liability. "Back study," he said. "He said you'd stay in your room." He was wrong. She moved past him before he could object. The back study was a room she hadn't been in before. Smaller than the front study, no bookshelves, maps on the walls, and a wide table covered with laptops and printed surveillance photographs. 3 men she hadn't met were grouped around the table. Luca stood at the far end, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his hands braced on the table's edge as he studied a satellite image of the estate's road network. He looked up when she entered. His expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten once. "I told Marco to keep everyone upstairs." "I told you I'm not a prisoner." She moved to the table and looked at the satellite image. "These are the surveillance teams?" The man beside Luca, older, heavy-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cut militarily short, looked at Luca. Luca nodded. "4 vehicles," the older man said. He had the flattened vowels of a Chicago South Side accent and a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "They positioned here, 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 and here." He indicated points on the image. "They've got eyes on every access road within a quarter mile. The east road's the only one that isn't covered, but it dead ends at the water." "Your name?" Sienna said. The man looked at her again, still assessing, still not warm. "Caruso." "You've been here before, Caruso. You know the property." "I know it well enough." "Then you know the east road doesn't just dead end at the water." She reached across and pointed to a feature on the satellite image. A dark rectangle at the shoreline, partially obscured by tree cover. "There's a utility structure at the end of that road. What they're calling a dead end is actually the back of that building, and that building connects to this one." Silence in the room. Luca's hands were still on the table's edge. "How do you know that?" Caruso said. "Because I built the connection." She pulled one of the folded pages from her waistband and set it on the table beside the satellite image. "Access tunnel. 40 meters. Reinforced concrete, sealed at both ends with coated hatches. The east surveillance team can see the road, but they can't see the tunnel entry because it's below grade. There's 4 feet of earth over the top of it." Caruso stared at the drawing. Then he looked at Luca. "She's right," Luca said quietly. "I didn't tell her about the tunnel. She drew it." Caruso looked back at Sienna with an expression she'd been seeing on men's faces since she woke up in that hospital. A recalibration, involuntary and slightly uncomfortable, as if the image of her they'd constructed in their heads no longer fit the space available. "Tunnel's sealed from our end," Caruso said. "The hatch in the basement was welded shut 2 years ago." "Sealed isn't the same as impassable. What's the weld gauge?" "I don't know." "Find out." She turned to Luca. "If we can open the tunnel, we have an exit route the surveillance teams don't know about. It comes out behind the lakeside structure. From there, the tree line runs east for another 300 meters before it breaks. Depending on what's on the other side of those trees, we might be able to move without being seen." "Old property access road," Luca said. "Runs parallel to the lake for about half a mile before it connects to the county highway." "Are those teams covering the county highway?" "Not currently." "Then that's our exit." "Our exit," Luca repeated. "I'm not staying here to be a problem you have to protect." Caruso exhaled through his nose, a compressed sound that might have been respect or might have been frustration. He straightened up from the table and looked at Luca. "She's got a point. If they tighten the perimeter tonight and we're still in the house at dawn, we're dealing with a siege situation. We've got 12 people on site. That's not enough to hold this property against a coordinated push." "They're not going to push," Luca said. "Not yet. They're watching. They want to know who else is here, what we know, whether the flash drive survived. Victor doesn't move until he has information." "Victor is the kind of man who moves before he needs to," Sienna said. "He put men on this property within 48 hours of me waking up. That's not information gathering, that's pressure." Luca looked at her. The same question lived behind his eyes that had been there since the hospital. "How much do you know? How much are you remembering?" And it was never comfortable for either of them. "Caruso," he said, without breaking eye contact with Sienna. "Check the tunnel hatch. Take someone with you who can work a cutting torch." Caruso left. The other 2 men followed him with the instinctive efficiency of people who knew when a room was about to become a 2-person conversation. The door closed. Luca straightened up from the table and rolled his sleeves down. He did it slowly, methodically, fastening each cuff without rushing, and Sienna had the sense it was a ritual, a way of putting himself back together before speaking. "You should have told me about the tunnel when I mentioned the lake house," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because the lake house is where the archive is, and I wasn't ready for that conversation." "We had that conversation last night. We had the beginning of it." He picked up the satellite image and set it aside. Underneath was a printed photograph, taken from street level, slightly blurred, showing a black sedan outside a building she recognized as Mercy General Hospital. In the background of the frame, barely visible, was the shape of a woman in a hospital gown at a window. Her, 2 nights ago. "They were watching before I got you out," Luca said. "This was taken 6 hours after you were admitted. They had eyes on the hospital before you woke up." Sienna looked at the photograph. The woman in the window was standing very still, her hand against the glass, her face turned slightly toward the camera. She looked like someone waiting for something she didn't know the name of. "The Mercer family has people everywhere," Luca continued. "In the city government, in the police department, in the legal system. Victor has been building that network for 30 years. The reason they can brand you a fraud and make it stick isn't just money, it's relationships. When your fiancé told the hospital staff they'd mistaken you for someone else, the charge nurse filed a report. That report went to the district records office, and the records clerk at the district office is on Victor Mercer's payroll. So my existence as a person has been administratively erased. For now. What about before the crash? Birth records, tax records, professional licenses?" "Being worked. The Mercer family has counsel who specialize in records management. It's a 24-hour job if you have the right people." He sat down in the chair at the head of the table. "Your name is Sienna Vale. You're 31 years old. You have a degree in architectural engineering from Northwestern, a master's from ETH Zurich, and a 7-year career building security systems for corporate and private clients across 3 countries. You're very, very good at what you do." She listened to this inventory of herself, a list of facts that should have felt like recognition and instead felt like a biography of a stranger, and waited for something to surface. A professor's face, a graduation ceremony, a desk in an office somewhere, a client's name. Nothing came. "Do I have family?" she said. "Your mother died when you were 19. Your father died 4 years ago." He said it cleanly, without softening it. She preferred that. "How?" A pause. "Your father, that's a longer conversation. For another time." "You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." She looked at him across the table. He was tired, genuinely deeply tired, the kind of fatigue that sleep didn't fix because it had its roots in something older than last night. His face in the lamplight showed the architecture of a man who'd spent years making decisions that cost him sleep, and not regretted the decisions, only the cost. "Tell me something true," she said. "Right now. Not a longer conversation, not later. Something true and small that doesn't require a whole history." Luca was quiet for a moment. "I've been watching out for you for 8 years," he said, "from a distance, without your knowledge. I knew when you got the Northwestern scholarship, when you left for Zurich, when you came back to Chicago. I knew when you got engaged to Colton Mercer, and I knew it was wrong. And I didn't intervene because it wasn't my place, and because you were a grown woman who didn't know I existed. Why were you watching me?" "That's the longer conversation." "Luca. Because I owed your father a debt I could never repay. So I paid it forward." He held her gaze. "That's all I can give you tonight." It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But it was true. She could feel it the way she felt the structural integrity of a wall, intuitively, without needing the calculations to confirm what the bones already knew. "All right," she said. "Then let's talk about getting out of here." Caruso came back 40 minutes later with torch burns on his forearms, and oil on his hands, and a look on his face that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was its close relative. "Hatch is open," he said. "Weld was standard grade, took 8 minutes." "Condition of the tunnel?" Sienna said. "Sound, dry, somebody maintained the drainage. There's a light fixture on a pull string every 10 meters. Half the bulbs are dead, but it's walkable. He paused. The hatch at the far end is different. That one's a coded entry. Electronic. I know the code, Sienna said. Every person in the room looked at her. She didn't know how she knew that either. The number had surfaced in her mind the moment Caruso mentioned the hatch. 6 digits, a pattern she felt in her fingers before she heard it in her head. Not remembered. Retrieved. Are you sure? Luca said. No, but I'd bet on it. Caruso looked at Luca. Luca looked at Sienna. The calculation was visible, weighing the cost of being wrong against the cost of not moving. We go at 4 a.m., Luca said. That's the lowest point of human alertness in a surveillance rotation. We take 4 people through the tunnel. The rest stay on the perimeter to give the impression of full occupancy. If they've been watching the house, they'll notice when your lights go dark. The lights won't go dark. I have the system running on a randomized schedule. It's been doing that since 11. To anyone watching from the road, this house is going to look occupied and active all night. Sienna looked at the satellite image again, the dark rectangles of the surveillance vehicles, the tree line, the ghost of the tunnel running beneath the earth between the 2 buildings. She'd built this, all of it. The randomized lighting schedule was hers. She remembered building it into the control system as a standard anti-surveillance feature, and the memory came back not with warmth, but with the flat, professional satisfaction of a contractor reviewing their own work. We need to get into the archive before we leave, she said. If the data is there, I need to know what we have before we're on the run. We don't have time to... We have 4 hours. The archive is 40 meters from here. She kept her voice level. If I walk into that building and find what I think I'm going to find, we go to the FBI with more than my testimony. We go with documentation, financial records, encrypted routing data, the kind of evidence that doesn't disappear because a records clerk gets a phone call. Luca was silent for a long moment. Caruso was watching him. 2 hours, Luca said. We spend 2 hours in the archive. At 3:30, we start moving people through the tunnel, regardless of what we found. Agreed. The basement smelled of concrete and cold and something mineral, old water, old stone, the bones of the house showing through its skin. Sienna followed Luca through the utility passage that ran behind the furnace room, Caruso behind them with a flashlight, and stopped at the open hatch. The tunnel was exactly what she'd drawn. Rectangular cross-section, bare concrete walls with a slight inward curve at the ceiling to handle lateral earth pressure, drainage channel cut into the floor along the left side. The pull-string lights Caruso had mentioned were every 10 meters, hanging at chest height. The working ones cast small pools of amber light that threw long shadows between them. Sienna stepped through the hatch and felt the tunnel close around her. Her chest tightened. Not fear. Recognition. She'd walked this space before, during construction, before the floor was finished, before the drainage channel was sealed. She remembered rubber boots and a hard hat, and the smell of fresh concrete in an enclosed space, which was both sharp and somehow organic. She remembered checking the junction boxes on the wall at 2-meter intervals. There they were, exactly where she'd put them. She started walking. Luca fell into step beside her. Caruso stayed 2 steps behind. They were halfway through when Luca said quietly, "You remembered something." "How can you tell?" "Your breathing changes. It gets steadier when a memory comes back, not faster, like you're relieved." She hadn't noticed that herself. It was a precise observation, the kind you only made about someone you'd been watching closely. She filed it without responding to it. The far hatch was steel-framed, set flush in the concrete wall, with a recessed numeric pad beside it. The pad was dusty, but the indicator light was green, still powered from the estate's main grid, exactly as designed. Sienna stood in front of it. The 6-digit code lived in her fingertips. She pressed them in order, 274913. The light shifted from green to amber. A mechanical sound saw the lock disengaging. The hatch swung inward. The room beyond was large, cool, and dark. Caruso swept the flashlight across a space the size of a double garage. Metal shelving units lined 3 walls, stacked with labeled boxes and binders. In the center of the room, 2 server towers sat on a raised platform with a small workstation between them. Monitors, keyboard, a junction panel for external drives. And the server towers were running. Their indicator lights blinked in the dark. Green, amber, green, patient and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that had been beating down here in the dark with no one to hear it. Sienna crossed to the workstation. The monitors came on when she touched the keyboard. The system had been in sleep mode, not powered down. "These are the archive servers," Luca said from behind her. "Everything the security network captured since installation." "How much data?" "I don't know. I haven't accessed this system in 2 years." Sienna looked at the directory on the monitor. The file structure was deeply familiar. She'd designed it. Chronological layers organized by date, then by source, then by data type. She navigated through it with the same procedural fluency she'd used on the sketches. Her fingers found the right paths without hesitation. She went to the date range she was looking for, the period when she'd been working on Mercer Tower. 18 months of captured network data, automatically logged by the monitoring architecture she'd built into the system. It was there. All of it. The encrypted financial data she'd found on the Mercer server, the routing chains she'd decoded, the Shell Corporation ledgers, the international account trails. She couldn't see the decrypted content from here. She didn't have the decryption keys, but the captured files were intact, time-stamped, and tagged with source identifiers that would survive any legal challenge. "It's here," she said. Luca was very still behind her. "Can you extract it?" he said. "I need an external drive, large capacity." She scanned the junction panel beside the workstation. "And I need 20 minutes. Caruso. Caruso disappeared back through the tunnel. Sienna stayed at the keyboard, opening files, checking timestamps, building a picture of the data structure she was about to pull. As she worked, she moved deeper into the directory and stopped. There was a second data set, adjacent to the Mercer files. Same time frame, different source tags. She knew these source tags. They were from the perimeter sensors of this estate, the same sensors that had captured the Mercer data. The sensors didn't discriminate. They logged everything that passed through their range, including transactions from Luca's own network. She opened the directory. The files were there, encrypted, archived, untouched. She couldn't read them without the keys, but their existence was unmistakable. She heard Luca's breathing shift slightly behind her. He'd seen the screen. "I told you it was there," he said. His voice was neutral, careful. "I know." She didn't close the directory. She looked at it for another moment. 2 sets of files, sitting side by side in the dark, like evidence doesn't care whose name it's under. "What you do with that is your decision," Luca said. "You've said that before." "I mean it more this time." Caruso came back through the tunnel with a drive in his hand. Sienna plugged it into the junction panel, went back to the directory, and started the extraction. The progress bar appeared on the monitor. Slow, deliberate, a long way to go. 20 minutes, minimum. She sat in the chair in front of the workstation and watched the bar move and didn't look at Luca and didn't look at the second file directory and tried to focus on the simple mechanical work of waiting. But the questions came anyway, not about the files, about the man standing behind her, who kept secrets the way other men kept furniture. Necessary, solid, arranged to make the space habitable, who watched over a woman he'd never met for 8 years because of a debt to her dead father, who sat in a hospital chair beside a stranger who had no memory and no name, and told her she was family without flinching. She didn't trust him. She'd told him that and she'd meant it, but she believed him. That was the part she couldn't logic her way out of. The progress bar moved. Outside, in the trees between the estate and the road, the surveillance teams were watching. Patient men doing patient work, waiting for dawn or orders, whichever came first. The drive finished extracting at 2:47 a.m. Sienna pulled it from the junction panel and turned to find Luca standing 2 feet behind her, closer than she'd realized. The flashlight Caruso had left on the shelf threw light at an angle that made his face half shadow, and in that moment he looked exactly like what he was. A man accustomed to standing in the dark, comfortable in it, at home in the spaces where light ran out. "Everything's on there," he said. "The Mercer data is, all of it, time-stamped and source-verified." He looked at the drive in her hand, not at her face, at the drive. And she watched something move behind his eyes, not greed, not calculation, something much older. the expression of a man who'd been playing a very long game and just watched the board shift in a direction he hadn't fully controlled. "The other files," she said. "Yes." "They're on there too." "Yes." "I copied everything in the directory." "I know." She held the drive between them. "You had 2 years to destroy those files. You didn't." "No." "Why not?" "Because destroying evidence is a different kind of crime than creating it, and I've been trying for a very long time to distinguish between the two." Sienna looked at him for a long moment. The drive was warm in her hand from the data transfer. "If I take this to the FBI, they'll have everything, including what I just told you about. That doesn't frighten you." It wasn't a question, but he answered it like one. "It terrifies me," he said. "But the alternative is asking you to choose what gets erased, and I'm not going to do that. You've already had enough things taken out of your hands." The room was very quiet. The servers hummed. The flashlight buzzed faintly on the shelf. Sienna put the drive in her pocket. "Let's go," she said. They moved at 3:20 a.m., earlier than planned, because Caruso's man on the south perimeter reported one of the surveillance vehicles had shifted position, moving from the secondary access road toward the main gate. It wasn't an attack. It was a tightening. Victor's people were getting impatient, or had received new information, or both. 4 of them went through the tunnel: Sienna, Luca, Caruso, and a compact, silent woman named Reyes, who Sienna hadn't spoken to yet, but who carried herself with the specific economy of movement that meant she'd been trained for exactly this kind of situation and had stopped thinking of it as unusual. The tunnel was cold and smelled of earth and old concrete. Their footsteps were carefully placed. No one used a light until they were through the first hatch, and even then it was a small directed beam aimed at the ground. At the far hatch, Sienna entered the code from the archive side, and they stepped out into the open space of the lakeside building. A larger area than the archive room, with a loading bay and a heavy roll-up door at the far end that opened onto the tree line. Caruso checked the door. "Clear." They moved. The air outside hit Sienna's face like ice water. She pulled the borrowed jacket tighter and followed Luca into the tree line, and behind her she heard the building door pulled shut with the precise quietness of people who understood that sound traveled differently at 3 a.m. The trees were dense, old growth, unpruned, the trunks close enough together that moving between them required careful placement. Sienna's ribs protested every sideways step, the cracked ones on the left side, which hadn't healed and weren't going to heal faster because she was walking through a forest in the dark with armed men. But she breathed around the pain the way she'd been breathing around it for 2 days. Shallow, controlled. Not fighting it, just acknowledging it and moving through. They reached the property access road in 12 minutes. Luca produced a key fob and a vehicle, a dark gray SUV parked in a gap between the trees that she hadn't seen until she was 20 feet from it. Came to life with a muted electronic sound, hazard lights blinking once in the dark. "You staged this here," she said. "Yesterday morning," Luca said, "before the surveillance teams arrived." "Before you knew there would be surveillance teams?" "I knew there would be surveillance teams. I just didn't know when." Caruso and Reyes took the front seats. Luca opened the rear door for Sienna, not with ceremony, just with the practical logic of, "Get in, we need to move." And she got in, and the door closed, and the vehicle moved along the access road without headlights, following the pale line of packed earth through the trees toward the county highway. For 6 minutes, no one spoke. The SUV moved at a walking pace, careful and dark. At the edge of the tree line, Caruso stopped, killed the engine, and they all listened. Distant traffic, wind, nothing else. He pulled onto the highway. The headlights came on. Chicago's glow defined the horizon ahead of them, a smeared orange brightness against the low overcast sky, and Sienna looked at it from the back seat and tried to feel something about the city. Not yet. It was still just a skyline, a collection of shapes she could name structurally, but not personally. "Where are we going?" she said. "I have a safe house on the near north side," Luca said. "We'll have 12 hours there before it needs to rotate." 12 hours to do what? Figure out how to use what's on that drive before the Mercers figure out we have it. Sienna reached into her pocket and closed her hand around the drive. It was small, lighter than it should be, given what it contained. "Victor Mercer tried to kill me for this," she said. He ran me off a bridge in a rainstorm to stop me from taking it to the FBI. Yes? It didn't work? No. She looked at the city getting closer through the windshield. Her cracked ribs ached. Her hands had stopped trembling sometime during the archive work, replaced by a steadiness that felt new, or not new, but recently uncovered, like a surface cleared of debris. I need to know why my father matters, she said. I need that longer conversation before we go any further. Luca turned to look at her from the front passenger seat. In the ambient light of the highway, his face was worn and quiet, and carrying the weight of something he'd kept to himself for a very long time. All right, he said. He said it the way a man says something when he's made the decision before the question was asked and has been waiting for the moment to become unavoidable. He turned back toward the windshield, and the city came toward them through the dark, and Sienna held the drive in her fist and waited for the story that had always been hers, and that she was only now, without any memory to protect her from it, finally ready to hear. Luca was quiet for a moment, just long enough that the highway lights slid across his face in intervals. Light, dark, and Sienna watched the rhythm of it like a man counting his own heartbeats before he speaks. Your father's name was Daniel Vale, he said. He was a structural engineer, not famous, not wealthy. He worked municipal contracts, bridges, drainage infrastructure, the kind of work that holds a city together without anyone noticing. He paused. 18 years ago, he was on site at a demolition project on the south side, a controlled implosion of an old warehouse complex. My grandfather was there, not officially. He was meeting someone on the adjacent property, a business meeting of the kind that doesn't get calendared. The highway hummed beneath the wheels. Caruso drove without looking at the mirror. Something went wrong with the implosion sequence, Luca continued. The east wall came down early. My grandfather was in the blast radius. Your father pulled him out, carried him 40 meters across a collapsing floor with fire coming through the east side, and got him to the emergency crews before the rest of the structure came down. He didn't dramatize it. He said it the way you report a fact. My grandfather survived with a broken arm and 3 cracked vertebrae. Your father walked away with burns on both forearms that never fully healed. Sienna looked down at her own forearms, the bandaged left one. She had no memory of burn scars, but she had no memory of anything. My grandfather tried to repay him, Luca said. Daniel Vale refused. Every form of it. Money, favors, connections. He refused all of it. He told my grandfather, and this is a direct quote, because my grandfather repeated it until the day he died. I didn't pull you out because of what you are. I pulled you out because you were a person and you needed help. That's the whole reason. The city was very close now, the skyline filling the windshield. My grandfather passed the debt to my father. My father passed it to me. Not as an obligation, as a standard, a way of measuring yourself. Luca's voice was even, but something underneath it was not. Daniel Vale died 4 years ago. A car accident on the I-90 that the police ruled as weather-related. I was never able to prove otherwise. But his daughter, you, were already living in Zurich, and when you came back to Chicago, you came back into a city where someone had already decided that the Vale family was better off gone. Sienna said nothing for a long time. The drive was still in her fist. The city's lights were everywhere now, surrounding them, the orange and white of a million lives stacked close together. You think Victor Mercer killed my father, she said. I think Daniel Vale found the same evidence you found, years earlier, and someone made sure it went nowhere. Luca looked at her again. I think you were finishing what he started, and I think you got much closer than he did. The SUVs slowed as they entered the city's grid, stoplights, cross streets, the smell of exhaust and rain-soaked asphalt filtering through the vents. Sienna looked at the drive in her hand. Her father's hands had burns that never healed. Her own hands had drawn 17 pages of technical architecture from a memory she couldn't consciously access. Both of them had reached for something that should have been out of reach, and both of them had been put in the water for it. The difference was she was still breathing. Victor Mercer took my father, she said. Her voice came out flat and cold and completely steady. He took my memory. He took my name. He put me in the river. She closed her fist around the drive until the edges pressed into her palm. He should have made sure I didn't come back up. No one in the car said anything. The stoplight ahead turned green. Caruso drove. And somewhere in the city around them, in an office building on the 41st floor of a tower that bore his family's name, Victor Mercer sat behind a mahogany desk and received a phone call that told him the estate was empty. The surveillance teams had found nothing, and the woman from the river had vanished again. And for the first time in 30 years of doing exactly what he wanted to, exactly the people he chose, Victor Mercer felt the specific, unfamiliar chill of something moving against him that he hadn't seen coming and could not yet name. He told his men to find her. He didn't tell them what he was afraid of. But his hand, when he set the phone down, was not entirely steady. The safe house was a third-floor apartment on North Sedgwick, above a dry cleaner that had been closed for renovation for 8 months. The renovation was permanent. The dry cleaner belonged to a holding company that belonged to another holding company that had no visible connection to anyone in that car. Sienna knew this without being told. She knew it the way she knew the tunnel code, not from memory, but from the professional architecture of her own paranoia, which apparently predated her amnesia by several years. The apartment was spare. A kitchen, a main room with 2 folding tables pushed together, a bedroom with a single bed and no decorations, a bathroom where the mirror had been removed from the wall and replaced with a whiteboard. The whiteboard had a grid on it, shift rotations, exit routes, contact protocols. Someone had been here recently. The grid was current. Reyes took a position by the window. Caruso disappeared into the back room and came out with a laptop. Luca cleared one of the folding tables and set a small scrambled phone on it. "We have until tonight," he said. "After that, this location needs to burn." "Burn meaning vacate," Sienna said. "Meaning vacate completely and permanently." He looked at the drive in her hand. "Can you access the encrypted Mercer files without their original decryption key?" "The files I captured from the estate servers are raw encrypted packages. The monitoring system logged them as is without decrypting. To open them, I'd need either the original key or someone with the capability to crack the encryption." She set the drive on the table. "But there's another layer. When I decoded the Mercer data originally, before the crash, I must have found the key somewhere in their system. Which means either the key is on the flash drive that went into the river with my car, or I memorized it." "Can you access it? The way you access the tunnel code?" "I don't know. Those were procedural memories, physical actions, spatial knowledge. A decryption key is a different kind of memory." "Try." She sat down. Caruso opened the laptop and connected the drive. The directory appeared on screen. The same architecture she'd built, the same file structure she'd navigated in the archive room 2 hours ago. The Mercer files sat in their folder, sealed, each one tagged with the encryption identifier. Sienna stared at the identifier string. 16 characters, alphanumeric with 2 special characters. She looked at it the way she looked at her own drawings, not forcing recognition, just watching the surface of her mind for anything that moved. 3 minutes passed. "Nothing," she said. Keep looking. Staring at it harder won't. You drew a 40-meter tunnel from memory while you were concussed and running on hospital soup. Give it 3 more minutes." She looked at the string again. The character sat on the screen, inert and indifferent. She let her eyes defocus slightly, the way she defocused when she was drafting, not looking at the detail, looking at the shape underneath the detail. Something shifted. Not the whole key. A fragment. 4 characters in the middle of the string that felt not familiar, but right. The way a structural joint feels right before you've done the math to confirm it. "I have part of it," she said. 4 characters. The middle section. "Can you reconstruct the rest?" "I can try. I need to work through the architecture of how I built my key management system. The way I constructed encryption keys followed a pattern, a personal methodology. If I can recover the methodology, I can reconstruct the key from the fragment." Caruso slid the laptop closer to her. She started typing, not the key, but notes to herself, mapping the logic she used to build security credentials, how she combined structural data with numerical sequences, how she anchored keys to building-specific measurements so they were memorable without being guessable. She worked for 40 minutes. The room was quiet around her. Luca on the phone in the corner, speaking in a low voice she couldn't parse. Reyes at the window. Caruso reading something on his own phone with the studied inattention of someone deliberately not watching the most important thing in the room. The key assembled itself in pieces. Not all at once. Incrementally, character by character, each one unlocking the next the way a combination lock works, each correct digit making the next one findable. At 5:14 a.m., she had a complete string. She typed it into the decryption field and pressed enter. The files opened. What was inside them was worse than she'd expected, and she'd expected it to be bad. The financial records were dense. Shell corporations nested inside shell corporations. Account numbers routing through jurisdictions that existed specifically for the purpose of not caring about jurisdiction. But the money trail was readable once you knew the architecture. Sienna read it the way she read blueprints, systematically, layer by layer, following each load path to its structural conclusion. The Mercer family had been laundering money for 11 years. That part matched what Luca had told her. But the scope was larger than she'd understood. It wasn't just Victor's real estate operation. The money had been flowing through municipal infrastructure contracts, city drainage projects, bridge rehabilitation, the kind of structural work that Daniel Vale used to do. She stopped, went back 3 screens, found the contract records for a municipal bridge rehabilitation project on the south side. 18 years ago. The same year as the warehouse implosion. The same year her father pulled Luca's grandfather out of the rubble. The bridge project had been awarded to a construction company, a company she now recognized as a Mercer shell from the pattern of its financial routing. The contract was worth $4 million. The work had been certified as complete by a city inspector whose name appeared on 3 other Mercer-adjacent contracts in the same 18-month window. But the bridge had never been rehabilitated. The funds had moved through the shell company and out to an offshore account within 60 days of the contract award. Daniel Vale had been the structural engineer assigned to review that bridge. Sienna sat very still. She went through the next layer of documents, found a complaint report, internal, never filed with any regulatory body, authored by a Daniel Vale, structural engineering review, noting significant discrepancies between the contracted work specifications and the observable condition of the bridge. The report was dated 4 months before the warehouse implosion. Her father had found the fraud, had tried to report it internally, and then, 4 months later, had been present at an incident that nearly killed the grandfather of the man who would inherit a criminal empire. She pulled up the incident report from the warehouse implosion. The sequence of events as recorded, the certified cause of the premature wall collapse, equipment failure, specifically, a detonation controller that had been modified from its factory specification, modified by the construction company on site, the same Mercer shell. The room felt smaller. The walls hadn't moved, but they felt like they had, like the air in the space had compressed by several degrees of pressure. She sat for another moment, not moving, not blinking, just letting the shape of it settle into her. Then she stood up and turned to Luca. He was still on the phone. He saw her face and ended the call without saying goodbye. The warehouse implosion wasn't an accident, she said. Something happened to his face, a very controlled, very careful stillness. They were trying to kill your grandfather, she said. The detonation controller was modified. It was a Mercer construction company on site. My father had filed a fraud complaint against that same company 4 months earlier. They were covering the contract fraud by eliminating the people who could testify to it. Her voice was steady, and she hated that it was steady. Your grandfather was a loose end. My father was a loose end. They put them both in the same location and modified the equipment. Luca set the phone down on the table. He placed it carefully, precisely, the way you set something down when you're managing the force in your hands. My grandfather survived because your father pulled him out, he said. Your grandfather survived by accident. The target was both of them. She held his gaze. Victor Mercer has been cleaning up witnesses for 18 years. My father found the fraud, tried to report it, got put in that warehouse, survived, and spent the next 14 years keeping his mouth shut. Probably because someone told him what would happen if he didn't. And then 4 years ago, when I came back to Chicago and started working security contracts, someone decided the Vale family was due for another accident. Your father's car accident. The I-90. You said you couldn't prove it was anything other than weather-related. I couldn't. The Mercer financial records might be able to. She turned back to the laptop. Went into the files with a different search parameter now. Not the real estate routing, not the shell corporations. Payments to individuals. Contract work of the untraceable kind routed through the same shell structure but in smaller amounts, targeted and specific. She found the first one in 40 seconds. A payment, 4 years ago, 2 weeks before Daniel Vale's car accident. $50,000, routed through a Nevada LLC to an individual account. The account was numbered, not named, but the routing pattern matched 3 other payments in the file, each one preceding an event that had been ruled accidental or unrelated. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. The edge was cold metal. She breathed around her ribs. "He killed my father," she said. "It's in the records, a contracted payment 2 weeks before the accident." Luca was beside her now. He looked at the screen. His jaw was tight enough that she could see the muscle working beneath the skin. "We have it," he said. "We have the financial proof. We don't have direct testimony. This level of documentation, plus the encrypted routing records, plus your testimony as the architect who captured this data, a federal prosecutor can build a case." "If we get to a federal prosecutor." "We will." She turned on him. It came out faster than she'd planned, the anger breaking through the controlled surface, the thing she'd been holding at the bottom of her chest since she woke up in a hospital room with no name and no past, and a man standing at the foot of her bed who claimed her like luggage. "Don't say that like it's simple," she said. "You've had 8 years to do something about this. My father had 14 years and he spent them silent, probably because someone told him what would happen to me if he talked." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Just once." She pulled it back. "Victor Mercer has been killing witnesses and calling it weather and equipment failure for nearly 2 decades, and no one has stopped him because the people who could stop him are on his payroll or in the ground." "That was before you pulled the records." "The records don't mean anything if I can't deliver them." "Then we deliver them." "How?" "He has surveillance on your estate. He has your exit routes under watch. He has a records clerk in the district office who already erased my identity. What makes you think we walk into a federal building and hand over a drive and walk out alive?" Luca looked at her for a long moment. The anger didn't seem to surprise him. He received it the way he received everything, directly, without deflecting, taking the full weight. "Because I have something Victor doesn't," he said. "What?" "I know what he doesn't know, I know. And that gap, what he thinks is his advantage versus what he's actually exposed. That's the space we're going to work in." It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But she was running on 5 hours of sleep in 3 days, cracked ribs, borrowed clothes, and a grief that didn't have a face yet because the man it belonged to was someone she couldn't remember. She sat back down at the laptop and kept reading. Chuck. The call came at 8 a.m. Luca's scrambled phone. He answered it and listened without speaking for approximately 30 seconds. When he lowered the phone, his expression had changed in a way that Sienna couldn't immediately classify. Not fear, not anger, but something between them. Something that had components of both and resolved into neither. "What?" she said. He looked at Caruso first. Caruso straightened from his position at the far table. "The flash drive," Luca said, "from the river." Sienna's stomach dropped. "They found it," she said. "The recovery divers Victor hired found the car this morning. It was 30 feet down, half a mile downstream from the impact point. The drive was still in the cup holder." He set the phone on the table. "Victor now knows exactly what you copied. He knows the file structure. He knows there's a decryption key he doesn't have. And he knows the data is out there. That accelerates everything." "It's worse than that." Luca's voice was flat and precisely controlled in a way that told her the thing he was about to say had not been easy to receive. "The drive was intact, which means Victor can see the directory. He can see the file names. And one of those file names—" He stopped. "What file name?" "You named the files when you copied them. A personal naming system. There's one file in the directory labeled with my name. DeLuca. Network archive. Cross-reference." The cold hit her before the implication fully landed. "He knows you have a copy," she said. "He knows I have data that cross-references his financial network. He doesn't know what's in it yet, but he knows I've been holding something that connects to his operation. Luca pressed both hands flat on the table. Her gesture, she realized, unconsciously mirrored. Victor Mercer now believes I've been building a case against him for 2 years, that I've been sitting on evidence and waiting for the right moment, that this was planned. Was it? No, you built the redundant capture system without my knowledge. I didn't know what the archive servers contained until last night. He won't believe that. No, he won't. The room had shifted. Not physically. The walls were still the same distance apart. The windows still gray with early morning light. Reyes still at her post. Caruso still holding the weight of his own calculated silence. But the geometry of the situation had changed, and everyone in the room felt it. They were no longer people hiding from Victor Mercer. They were people Victor Mercer had decided were at war with him. He'll move fast now, Caruso said. It was the first thing he'd said in 2 hours. He won't wait to verify. He'll assume the worst-case scenario because it's the scenario that matches what he'd do. How many people does he have? Sienna said. In Chicago? Caruso exhaled. Enough. Give me a number. Contracted security, city contacts, political connections, off-book private contractors. He shook his head. More than us. Sienna looked at the drive on the table. The thing she'd spent 3 days trying to protect, which had just become the thing that confirmed every fear its existence was supposed to prevent. Her father had filed a complaint and been put in a building with a modified detonator. She had copied a drive and been put in a river. The pattern was very clear. Victor Mercer didn't litigate. He deleted. She picked up the drive and looked at it. Reyes had turned from the window, not abandoning her post, just angling her body so she could see the room. Her face was the face of someone running contingency calculations in real time. We can't wait until tonight to move, Sienna said. No, Luca agreed, and we can't go to the federal building directly. If Victor has city contacts, he'll have eyes on every federal building in downtown Chicago within the next 2 hours, if he doesn't already. So we need a different delivery mechanism. She turned the drive over in her hand. We need someone inside the federal system who isn't reachable through city connections. Someone Victor's network doesn't touch. I have one name, Luca said. A federal prosecutor. She's been building a financial crimes case for 3 years, working out of the Northern District. She's clean. I know her history. I know her record. Victor's people tried to compromise her 18 months ago and failed. Does she know you? A pause. She knows of me. Is that a problem? It might be. Can you reach her without going through a contact that traces back to the city network? There's a way, but it requires moving in the open. It requires making a phone call from a line that's potentially monitored and accepting the risk that Victor's people will hear it. How long would it take them to respond to that information? 20 minutes, maybe less. Sienna looked at the clock on the wall. 8:17 a.m. Chicago outside the windows, fully awake now. Traffic and gray sky and the specific busy indifference of a city that didn't know and didn't care what was happening in a third-floor apartment above a shuttered dry cleaner on North Sedgwick. 20 minutes. She'd designed security systems in 40. She'd extracted 2 decades worth of financial crime from an archive server in 20. She'd navigated a tunnel in the dark using nothing but the memory in her hands. Make the call, she said. Luca reached for the phone, and it was in that exact moment. His hand 2 inches from the device, Sienna watching, Caruso straightening, Reyes pivoting back toward the window. That the window behind Reyes shattered inward. Not a gunshot. A device. Thrown. Not fired. It hit the floor and spun, and Reyes shouted one word. Gas! The canister was military grade. Sienna knew this because she'd specified against this exact model in security design briefs. She knew its dispersal radius, its activation time, its effect on an unventilated indoor space. That knowledge was purely procedural, living in the same place as the tunnel code and the decryption key. It did her no good. The gas hit her eyes before she'd taken 2 steps toward the door. The pain was immediate and total. Not a burn, a pressure, like her eyes were being pressed from the outside in. She grabbed the edge of the table, missed, grabbed it again, and moved by feel toward where the door had been. A hand closed on her arm. Luca's hand. She knew it from the grip. which was the same grip he'd used in the tunnel. Firm, not panicked. Down, he said. Move low. She dropped to her knees. The gas was lighter than air and rising. Lower was marginally better. She pressed her face against her shoulder and moved forward in the direction he was pulling. The door. Handle. Out. The hallway was clear. They made the stairwell in 12 seconds. Caruso behind them, moving. Reyes. Where's Reyes? Sienna said. Moving another way. Don't stop. She didn't stop. They went down the stairs fast, Sienna's eyes streaming, her ribs screaming at the pace. At the bottom, a fire exit to the alley behind the building. Luca hit the bar. The door swung out. Cold air. Gray light. Wet asphalt. A man was standing at the far end of the alley. Then another. And a third coming from the near end. They weren't Victor's contracted security. She could see that immediately. The posture was wrong. The clothes were wrong. The way they moved was too economical for hired muscle. These were professional operators, the kind that didn't get contracted through a wealthy developer's network, the kind that got contracted through entirely different channels. DeLuca. The man at the far end spoke. He was maybe 40, ordinary looking in the way that very dangerous people sometimes were, a face that didn't announce itself. Don't move. Luca had gone very still beside her, not frozen, still in the way of a man calculating. This isn't Victor Mercer's people, Sienna said. No, Luca said. Then who? Federal Task Force, the man said. He held up a credential wallet. Even from 20 feet, through tearing eyes and poor light, the badge was unmistakable. Both of you on the ground. Now. Neither of them moved. The man's expression didn't change. Ms. Vale, we know what's on that drive. We know who gave it to you, and we know what DeLuca's been using it for. You have approximately 30 seconds to decide whether you want to walk out of this city as a witness or be carried out as an accessory. Sienna's hand closed around the drive in her pocket. What do you mean, who gave it to me? She said. I copied those files myself. The man looked at her with something she couldn't read. Not cruelty, not satisfaction. Something closer to pity, which was worse. You were fed the access credentials, he said. Someone left a door open in the Mercer network specifically so you'd find what was behind it. The evidence you copied. It's been curated, selected. You didn't stumble onto Victor Mercer's financial records, Ms. Vale. Someone built you a path straight to them. The alley was very quiet. Who? She said. The federal agent looked at Luca. And Luca, who had open hands when he was honest, who pressed his palms flat when he was grounding himself, who had told her the truth about her father and the debt and the drive in a voice that never once wavered. Luca did not look at her. He looked at the ground. And in the silence that followed, with the drive in her fist and the gas still burning in her eyes, and the city going about its morning all around them like nothing was happening at all, Sienna Vale understood that the man who had claimed her as family, who had carried an 8-year debt like a scar, who had told her she could trust the evidence of her own hands, had known, from the beginning, exactly what she would find, exactly where she would find it, and had said nothing, because the evidence she'd spent 3 days trying to protect wasn't just going to destroy Victor Mercer. It was going to destroy him too, and he had needed her to carry it somewhere he couldn't carry it himself. Needed her hands, her name, her amnesia, her grief. Needed all of it, and had used every piece of it, and had been honest about almost everything except the one thing that mattered most, that she had never been rescued. She had been deployed. She didn't hit him. She wanted to. The impulse moved through her body like a current, up from the stomach, into the chest, down the arms, arriving at her hands as something hot and physical and entirely useless. She stood in the alley with the drive in her fist and her eyes still burning from the gas, and looked at the side of Luca DeLuca's face while he looked at the ground, and she made herself breathe. 1 breath. 2. The federal agent was still watching them. His 2 men hadn't moved from their positions at each end of the alley. Patient, professional. The posture of people who'd done this enough times to know that the worst moments happened in the first 30 seconds, and that silence was usually the most effective tool in the kit. Get up, Sienna said. Luca raised his eyes. Look at me, she said. He looked at her. His face was exactly what she'd feared it would be. Not guilty, not calculating, not the face of a man caught in a manipulation. It was worse. It was the face of a man who had done something he believed was necessary and was prepared to absorb the consequences without excuse, which was the expression of someone who had thought it through and made a decision and was not going to insult her by pretending it was something other than what it was. That was almost worse than a lie. "Tell me what he said," she said to the agent. "All of it." The agent, whose name she would learn in approximately 40 seconds, was Harmon, lowered his credential wallet and looked at her with the careful attention of someone reassessing the situation in real time. "Ms. Vale, I need both of you to tell me what he said. I'm not moving until you do." A pause. Harmon glanced at Luca, then back at her. He made a calculation she could see on his face, the kind you make when you realize the variable you thought was passive has opinions. DeLuca has been cooperating with the Northern District Financial Crimes Task Force for 14 months, Harmon said. In exchange for reduced exposure on his own organization's activities, he provided us with access protocols for the Mercer network and intelligence on Victor Mercer's financial routing architecture. He kept his voice even, reporting, not editorializing. 3 months ago, he flagged you as a potential evidence carrier, someone inside the Mercer operation with security access, architectural knowledge of their network, and a personal connection to the Mercer fraud dating back 18 years through your father. "He flagged me," Sienna said. "He identified you as someone who could access the network and extract documentation in a way that would be credible in federal court, a legitimate professional with no criminal record and no connection to any organized interest." Harmon paused. "The access credentials you used the night before the crash, the ones that got you into Colton Mercer's server, were provided to Luca's contact and filtered to you through a chain that left no visible fingerprints." The alley was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a window opened and closed. "The crash," Sienna said. "Was that planned too?" "No," Harmon said it firmly. "Victor Mercer acted independently. He had his own surveillance on his son's residence, and he identified the breach before we anticipated. The crash was Victor's response, not ours. We didn't know it was going to happen." He stopped. Then, "We didn't get there in time to prevent it." She heard the weight of that last sentence, the passive construction. "We didn't get there in time, not we tried to stop it," the careful grammar of institutional culpability. She turned to Luca. "You put me in that building knowing Victor had surveillance on it," she said. "I didn't know the surveillance was live that night." His voice was level, not defensive. "I believed the access window was clean. I was wrong." "You were wrong." "Yes. I went into a river because you were wrong." He held her gaze. "Yes." She looked at the drive in her hand, the weight of it, the heat of it from being held too long in a closed fist. "Do you have the decryption key?" she said. Not to Harmon, to Luca. A pause. "Yes." "You've had it the whole time." "Yes." "So everything I spent last night reconstructing, I wanted you to have it independently. A key that came from your own memory is more defensible in court than one provided by a cooperating witness with a vested interest in the outcome." She almost laughed. The sound that came out of her was not quite laughter and not quite the other thing. It lived in the space between, which was not a comfortable space. "You are," she said, "the most methodical person I have ever met. You don't remember meeting anyone." "I don't need to." Harmon took a step forward. "Ms. Vale, I need that drive, and I need both of you in a vehicle in the next 4 minutes. Victor Mercer's people are going to find this location within the hour. We have intelligence that his contractor team is running a grid search of the near north side. When they do, this alley becomes a problem for everyone standing in it." Sienna looked at the drive one more time. She thought about her father, about a man who'd filed a complaint and then spent 14 years keeping his mouth shut because someone had told him what silence was worth and what speaking cost, who had died on the I-90 in weather that might not have been weather, who had pulled a stranger out of a burning building because it was the right thing to do and had spent the rest of his life paying for that decency. She thought about the woman in the hospital window, herself, unrecognized, standing with her hand against the glass, waiting. She held the drive out to Harmon. He took it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Mercer Tower," Harmon said. "Victor's there. He got there 40 minutes ago with his legal team and his private security. He thinks he's securing the building, controlling the one location that ties directly to the evidence." He pocketed the drive. "He doesn't know we have the archive data. He thinks the only copy of the financial records went into the river. He's up there right now believing he's already won." Sienna looked at the building. Even from North Sedgwick, she could see it. The unfinished tower rising above the surrounding roof lines, skeletal and enormous. Its upper floors still open steel frame against the gray morning sky. The building she'd drawn from memory on her first night in Luca's house. The building she'd designed the security systems for, whose internal architecture lived in her hands like a second skeleton. "He chose that building specifically," she said. "It's his most controlled environment," Harmon said. "Security systems he believes are loyal to him. Access points he controls? High ground." "He doesn't control the security systems," Sienna said. "I built them, and I know every way in and out that isn't on any blueprint he's ever seen." They went in 3 vehicles, Harmon's team in the lead car, 4 federal agents, armed, wearing civilian clothes over tactical vests. Luca and Sienna in the middle vehicle, driven by a woman who hadn't been introduced and didn't seem to require introduction. Caruso in the rear vehicle, with 2 of Luca's people who had materialized from somewhere during the alley standoff, apparently on Luca's signal, in the quiet way that Luca's people always materialized. Sienna sat in the back seat and didn't look at Luca and looked at her hands instead. They were steady. She noted this with the detached clarity that had been running parallel to everything else since the alley. A cold, analytical track that kept observing and recording while the rest of her processed the shape of what she'd learned. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The pain in her ribs was a constant background note that she'd integrated into her operating baseline. She was angry. That was also a background note now. Steady, cold, banked like a fire that doesn't need oxygen because it's already found its fuel source and knows how to sustain itself. "The security system," she said. She was talking to herself as much as to Luca, working through the architecture out loud. "The building has 42 floors. The current construction phase puts habitable space on floors 1 through 28. Above that is open steel frame, no exterior cladding, no interior finishing, exposed structure. Victor will be on the upper floors of the habitable section, probably 25 or 26. That's where I put the primary security operations center." "Why there?" Luca said. "Sight lines. From 25, you have visual coverage of every vehicular approach to the building. You can see a threat coming from a quarter mile in any direction." She paused. "Which means he'll see us coming. Harmon's team has credentials to enter the building through the federal access protocols. That will alert every security node on floors 20 through 30 within 30 seconds of the credential being scanned. Victor will know exactly how many people are entering and through which access point." She looked out the window. The tower was closer now, its frame filling more of the sky. "We can't go in through the front." "What's the alternative?" "There's a construction access on the building's north face. It's a material elevator. Exterior mounted, open platform, runs from grade level to floor 30 on a separate power circuit. It's not connected to the primary security network because it was installed before I completed the network integration. I never tied it in because it was scheduled for removal once the exterior cladding was complete. The cladding was never finished. Victor won't know about it. His security team won't have it on their access map. It runs dark. No camera coverage, no card reader, just a manual call panel and a key switch." She had the key's profile in her head, clear as a drawn line. "I'll know the key type when I see the panel." Luca was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're walking into a building where a man who already tried to kill you once is waiting with private security and a legal team and nothing left to lose." "Yes." "With cracked ribs and no weapon and 3 days of concussion recovery. And a complete working knowledge of every security system in that building, which is worth more than any of those things." He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I want that to be very clear." "I know. I'm doing it because my father spent 14 years afraid and Victor Mercer decided that wasn't enough. He needed him dead too." Her voice stayed even, the banked fire. That's the only reason I'm in this car. Luca nodded once. No argument. No attempt to reframe or reclaim any part of what she'd said. That, more than anything, was the thing about him she couldn't resolve. The way he absorbed accountability without bargaining. It would have been easier if he'd tried to defend himself. She knew how to fight a defense. She didn't know what to do with a man who simply stood in the full consequence of his choices and waited. She turned back to the window. The tower filled the sky. The construction access was on the north face, exactly where her hands had told her it would be. A yellow-painted steel platform attached to an exterior track, currently sitting at grade level, its call panel mounted on a weathered post beside the building's north foundation wall. The key switch was a standard construction-grade tumbler. She felt the profile of it the moment her eyes landed on the panel, the same way she'd felt the tunnel code. Harmon looked at the panel. "You need a key." "I need a key blank and 30 seconds, she said. Caruso produced a ring of blanks from somewhere. She went through them by touch, profiles, tooth patterns, and found the closest match in 12 seconds. She worked the blank against the tumbler's visible tell with the flat edge of a coin from Luca's pocket, reading the resistance points, and when she inserted it the second time, the switch turned. The platform hummed, the elevator engaged. Harmon stared at her. "Construction security," she said. "The whole industry uses 4 standard tumbler profiles. I've bypassed all of them." She stepped onto the platform. "Let's go." They went up in 2 loads. Sienna, Luca, Harmon, and 1 federal agent on the first run. The platform rose along the building's north face, open to the air, the city dropping away beneath them in layers. The wind at floor 15 was significant. At floor 20, it was cold enough to cut. Sienna held the platform railing with her right hand and pressed her left arm against her ribs and kept her eyes on the building face moving past them. At floor 25, she signaled Harmon. The platform stopped. They stepped off onto an unfinished floor. Concrete poured but not finished, raw walls, cabling hanging from junction boxes that hadn't been covered yet. The space smelled of concrete dust and hydraulic fluid and the specific cold of an unheated commercial space. Emergency lighting on the stairwell columns threw long, thin shadows. Sienna moved immediately to the nearest wall and found the junction panel she was looking for. A secondary control node for the security network, one of 12 distributed across the building's habitable floors. She pulled the panel cover with her fingers, found the manual override toggle she'd built in for maintenance access, and switched it. "What did that do?" Harmon said. "Isolated this floor from the primary network. Victor's Security Operations Center just lost all sensor feeds from floor 25. She replaced the cover. "They'll see a system fault, a ghost in the network. It'll read as a sensor malfunction, not a breach. They'll spend 4 to 6 minutes running a diagnostic before they send anyone to physically check." 4 minutes. "Enough!" She moved to the stairwell door, listened. No footsteps from above. She pushed through. The stairwell was concrete and dim and amplified every sound. She went up 1 floor, 26, and stopped at the door. Through the small wired glass window in the door, she could see the Security Operations Center. It occupied the north half of the 26th floor, a purpose-built space that she'd specified in her original design, monitoring stations, communications equipment, a main display wall showing feeds from every camera in the building, except floor 25, which was currently dark. 2 men at the monitoring stations, a third by the door on the far side of the room, all armed, all focused on the display wall where the floor 25 fault was throwing a yellow alert. And at the far end of the room, standing with his back to the stairwell door, looking at the city through the full-height window, was Victor Mercer. Sienna had no memory of his face. She'd told herself that for 3 days, but standing here, looking through 6 inches of wire-reinforced glass at the back of a man who had ordered her death and her father's death and had built 20 years of prosperity on the silence of people he'd broken or buried, she didn't need memory. She felt him in the marrow, the specific cellular revulsion of a body that knew its predator. He was talking on a phone. She couldn't hear words through the door, but she could read his posture. Relaxed, controlled, the shoulders of a man receiving good news, or at minimum neutral news. He thought he was in his safest location, He thought the drive was at the bottom of the river, and the woman who'd copied it was running, and everything that needed containing was contained. She stepped back from the window. Harmon was right behind her. She looked at him and held up 3 fingers, then pointed through the door. He nodded. He signaled his agent, who moved up beside him. "The room's security door has a 30-second lockdown capability," she murmured, barely above a breath. "When I hit the override from inside, all exits seal. His security can't get out, and no one on other floors can get in. You have that 30 seconds to get everyone on the ground before the door rearms." "Where's the override panel?" Harmon murmured back. "Left of the main display wall. Gray panel, red toggle, covered. You'll see it." "What about you?" "I'll be keeping Victor Mercer from reaching his phone long enough for it to matter." Harmon looked at her. A moment of assessment, rapid, professional, ending in a nod that said he'd seen people operate under worse conditions and was willing to bet on her. She pushed through the door. The 2 men at the monitoring stations turned. The one by the far door reached for his radio. Sienna was already at the secondary control node on the near wall, the same distributed system she'd just used on the floor below, a twin panel, and she hit the manual override before anyone had completed a full step toward her. The room's emergency lighting shifted to red, every door sealed with a hydraulic thud that she felt in her feet through the concrete. "Lock down," she said, loud enough for the room. "All exits are sealed. The rearm cycle is 30 seconds. Anyone who wants to be on the right side of this door when it opens should sit down and put their weapons on the floor." The 3 security men did not sit down, but they hesitated. 1 second, 2, and in that hesitation, Harmon and his agent came through the stairwell door behind her, weapons drawn, credentials out, and the calculation in the security men's eyes completed itself, and all 3 of them stopped moving. Victor Mercer had turned from the window. He was older in person than she'd have guessed from the surveillance photograph. Late 60s, silver-haired, with the lean, desiccated look of a man who'd converted his body fat into authority over many decades. His face was the face from her dream, the calm face, the face behind the windshield in the rain. He looked at her with no expression at all. "Ms. Vale," he said. She walked toward him, her ribs stabbed with every step. She kept walking. "You're more resilient than anticipated," he said. "I've heard that." "The drive is at the bottom of the river." "One drive is," she said. "The archive data from the estate servers has been in federal custody since 20 minutes ago. 14 months of encrypted financial routing, network captures, payment records, including a $50,000 contracted payment made 14 days before my father's car accident on the I-90. Something moved across Victor Mercer's face. The first thing she'd seen move there. It wasn't fear. It was the thing that preceded fear in a man who had spent 30 years believing he was beyond it. The moment of recognition. The moment the architecture of your security meets something it wasn't designed to hold. "That's circumstantial," he said. "Combined with the Mercer Tower Network archive, the Shell Corporation ledgers, the municipal contract fraud records going back 11 years, and the incident report from a Southside warehouse demolition 18 years ago that shows equipment modification by your construction company." She stopped 4 feet from him. "A federal prosecutor is going to have a very full week." The lockdown cycle ended. The doors unsealed. Harmon was already at the communications panel, his agent covering the disarmed security men, and the second load from the construction elevator, Caruso and the remaining federal agents, was coming through the stairwell door. Victor looked past her at Luca, who had entered behind Harmon and was standing near the door. Something happened between the 2 men in that look. A long, wordless communication that Sienna wasn't meant to be able to read. She read it anyway. The recognition of 2 people who had been playing the same game from opposite sides of the same table for a very long time and had both just watched the table get turned over. "You built this," Victor said to Luca, not angrily, almost with admiration. 14 months. "Longer than that," Luca said. "I started the day I found out about Daniel Vale." Victor's eyes moved back to Sienna. The calculation was still running behind them. She could see it, the search for an exit that wasn't architectural. A legal gap, a procedural vulnerability, a name he could call. "My counsel," he started. "Is downstairs," Harmon said, crossing the room with handcuffs already in hand. "They're being informed of the charges. You can speak with them at the federal building. He took Victor's arm. Victor allowed it. The physical compliance of a man who understood that resistance here cost him options he needed to preserve for later. But as Harmon turned him toward the door, Victor looked at Sienna one more time. Your father made the same mistake you did, he said. He thought the evidence was enough. He thought truth had weight. Sienna looked at him. The man who had taken her name, her memory, her father, and the better part of her life, and redistributed all of it in service of his own continued existence. It does, she said. You just spent 30 years making sure you never had to find out how much. Victor Mercer said nothing else. Harmon walked him through the door. The room began to empty. Federal agents, Mercer's disarmed security, Caruso coordinating the logistics of the building lockdown with the efficiency of a man who understood operations. The display wall still showed camera feeds from 41 of the building's 42 floors, and Sienna stood in front of it for a moment, looking at the building from the inside. Every corridor, every access point, every node of the system she'd built, and that had, without her knowing it, captured the evidence that would end the man who'd tried to bury her. She'd designed it, all of it, down to the redundant capture protocols that logged everything. She'd built the trap without knowing what it was for, and it had worked exactly as designed, and she didn't know yet whether to feel proud of that or hollowed out by it. The window behind her showed Chicago in full morning light, the lake silver and cold and enormous, the city spread across the plain in every direction, indifferent and alive. She became aware of Luca standing beside her. They stood there for a moment, both looking at the city, and neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was not comfortable and was not meant to be. The evidence against your organization, she said, is on the drive. Harmon will use it. Yes, that was always part of the arrangement. Reduced exposure, not immunity. He paused. I knew what I was giving up when I started cooperating. I made the calculation. You make a lot of calculations. Yes. Did you calculate what it would cost me? The silence this time was different, longer. No, he said. I told myself I did. I told myself it was a controlled risk, a managed exposure, that you would be safe because I was watching and because the operation was clean. He stopped, started again. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than admitting I was using a person I was supposed to be protecting. Sienna looked at the lake. I don't forgive you, she said. I know. I don't know if I ever will. I know that too. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold. Solid. The city 26 floors below, going about its morning. Somewhere in this building, Victor Mercer was being walked toward an elevator in handcuffs, and the legal machinery that he'd spent 30 years believing he owned was about to turn against him with the particular grinding certainty of a system that had been waiting for exactly this amount of evidence. It wasn't finished. She knew it wasn't finished. There were legal proceedings ahead, testimony to give, a name to rebuild, a memory still returning in fragments that arrived without permission at the edges of sleep. There was a father to grieve properly, with full knowledge of what he'd survived and what he hadn't. There was a life to reconstruct from the pieces of a woman she couldn't fully remember being. But Victor Mercer was in handcuffs, and the drive was in federal custody. And the building she'd designed, the one whose bones she'd known in her sleep, had done exactly what it was built to do. It had held. She took her hand off the glass. Harmon appeared in the doorway behind her. Ms. Vale, we need to move. There's a debrief at the federal building, and I'd strongly recommend you're present for the first— I know, she said. I'm coming. She turned from the window. Luca was still beside her, and she walked past him toward the door, and at the threshold she stopped without turning around. The debt, she said, between your family and mine. Whatever your grandfather believed he owed my father. Yes. It's done. Whatever it was, it's done. I'm not carrying it, and neither are you. She heard him breathe, just once, the sound of something released. All right, he said. She walked through the door and into the corridor and toward the elevator, and behind her, the Security Operations Center sat empty, with its display walls still cycling through camera feeds, and the city outside the windows was bright and cold and enormous, and somewhere below, On the street, a black sedan with federal plates was waiting, and Sienna Vale, who had no memory and then too much of it, who had been put in a river and pulled herself out of it, who had built the trap that caught the man who'd spent 30 years believing he was uncatchable, walked toward it without looking back. The elevator descended in silence. Floor numbers dropping on the panel, 26, 20, 15, 10, each one a layer of the building she knew better than she knew her own face in a mirror. At grade level, the doors opened and the cold air of the lobby hit her, raw concrete and construction dust and the smell of a building that wasn't finished yet and might never be finished the way it was originally planned. Outside, the black sedan was exactly where Harmon had said it would be. 2 federal agents flanking the doors. A second vehicle behind it, Victor Mercer already inside, already gone from her sightline, already becoming the subject of a case file rather than a man who had looked at her across a room and seen something disposable. Sienna walked to the sedan and put her hand on the door and stopped. She looked up at the tower one last time, all 42 floors of it rising above her against a sky that had finally, after 3 days of gray, broken open into something pale and cold and clear. She got in the car. The door closed. The sedan pulled away from the curb, and Mercer Tower shrank in the rear window, and Chicago moved around her in every direction, and for the first time since she'd woken up in a hospital room with nothing, Sienna Vale knew exactly who she was. The federal building on West Adams was the kind of place designed to make you feel the weight of institutional authority before you'd said a single word. Marble floors. Ceilings high enough to make a person feel proportionally small. The specific acoustics of a space built to process people rather than accommodate them. Footsteps echoed, voices flattened, and the ambient sound of the building was the sound of a machine that had been running for a long time and intended to keep running long after everyone currently inside it was gone. Sienna sat in a conference room on the 7th floor for 4 hours. Harmon's team brought coffee she didn't drink, and water she did, and a legal pad that she filled with handwritten notes in the precise, compressed script of someone who'd spent years writing in the margins of blueprints. 2 prosecutors joined them at the 90-minute mark. A woman named Delgado, mid-40s, with the contained intensity of someone who'd been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of evidence, and a younger man named Park, who took notes and asked the clarifying questions that Delgado didn't bother with because she already understood the answers. Sienna told them everything. Not in the order it had happened, in the order that made structural sense, which was the only order she knew how to work in. The security network she'd built for Mercer Tower, the data capture architecture she'd designed with redundant logging protocols, the encrypted financial files she'd found in the Mercer server, the archive servers at the estate, the decryption methodology she'd reconstructed from procedural memory. All of it laid out with the same precision she'd used to present a security design to a client. Here's the system, here's how it works, here's what it found. Delgado listened without interrupting. She had the quality that the best prosecutors and the best engineers shared, the ability to hold a complex structure in her head while new information was being added to it, updating the model in real time without losing the shape of the whole. When Sienna finished, Delgado looked at her notes for a long moment. "The estate archive data," she said. "You copied everything in the directory." "Yes, including files that pertain to DeLuca's own organization." "Yes." Delgado looked up. "That's going to complicate his cooperation agreement." "I know." "He knows too?" "He was standing next to me when I copied it." Delgado made a note. "All right." She set her pen down. "Ms. Vale, I want to be direct with you. What you've brought us today is more than sufficient to indict Victor Mercer on federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and given the payment record you found, we'll be pursuing a charge related to your father's death. That's going to take time. The forensic accounting alone is a 6-month process, but the foundation is here, and it's solid." "What about Colton?" "Colton Mercer is a more complicated question. His direct criminal exposure depends on what we can establish about his knowledge of his father's activities. We'll be pursuing that separately. He watched his father try to kill me. He stood in a hospital room and told a nurse he'd never seen me before." "I know, that's obstruction at minimum. Potentially accessory after the fact. We'll get there." Delgado's voice was even. Not cold, calibrated. The voice of someone who understood that justice and speed were not the same thing and had made her peace with that. Your testimony is going to be central to this. I need you available, reachable, and willing to testify when the time comes. That could be 8 months from now. It could be longer. I'll be there, Sienna said. There's also the matter of your identity documentation. The records that were altered through the Mercer Administrative Network. We have a team working on restoration. Your professional licenses, your employment history, your personal records. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Sienna nodded. She'd known it wouldn't be overnight. Overnight was for the kinds of stories where the resolution arrived at the same speed as the crisis, clean and proportional. Real things took longer. Real damage had a different repair timeline than the damage in the kind of stories people told to make sense of damage. One more thing, Delgado said. She hesitated. The first hesitation Sienna had seen from her. DeLuca. His cooperation agreement is going to be renegotiated in light of what the archive data contains. He was aware of that possibility when he entered the agreement, and he's indicated he intends to fully cooperate with the revised terms. She paused again. He also asked me to tell you, and I'm passing this on as a message, not as legal counsel, that he won't contest any use of the data you copied, including the files that pertain to his organization. Sienna looked at the table. The surface was conference room laminate, worn at the edges from years of elbows and files and the accumulated friction of difficult conversations. I know, she said. He told me himself. Delgado nodded once. She closed her folder. We'll need you back here next week to review the formal testimony structure. In the meantime, she slid a card across the table. You call me directly if anything happens. Any contact from the Mercer family, any approach from anyone you don't recognize. Victor is in custody, but his network isn't dismantled yet. It takes time. Sienna took the card. I understand. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? She thought about it. The honest answer was no. She had no apartment she could verify, no keys to any door she recognized, no address that existed in her retrievable memory. She had borrowed clothes and cracked ribs, and the beginning of a headache that had been building since the alley that morning and hadn't resolved. I'll figure it out, she said. The afternoon was gray and cold when she walked out of the federal building. Chicago in November, or whenever this was, she still wasn't entirely certain of the date, had the particular quality of a city that didn't apologize for its weather. The wind came off the lake and moved through the downtown canyons with full authority, and Sienna stood on the steps of the federal building and let it hit her face and breathed. In, out. The cold air tasted of exhaust and lake water and the mineral sharpness of the first real cold of the season. Caruso was at the bottom of the steps. She hadn't expected him. He was standing beside a dark car with his hands in his coat pockets, and his face arranged in the expression she'd come to recognize as his version of neutral, which was slightly less closed than his version of hostile and significantly more communicative than his version of nothing. He sent you, she said when she reached the bottom step. He asked. I decided. Caruso's distinction, his own version of agency. Where is he? Federal holding for now, voluntary. He went in with his counsel this morning to begin the cooperation process. He'll be out tonight or tomorrow, depending on the paperwork. He looked at her steadily. He asked me to make sure you had somewhere to stay. I don't need... There's a hotel on Michigan Avenue. The reservation is in your name. Not his, your name. He reached into his coat and produced a key card. No obligation attached, no condition. It's paid through the end of the week. Sienna looked at the key card, then at Caruso. You've known him a long time, she said. 22 years. Is he a good man? Caruso was quiet for a moment, not evasive, much. Genuinely considering the question, turning it over the way you turn over something with multiple surfaces to find the one that answers what's being asked. He's a man who's tried to be better than what he was built to be, Caruso said. Some days that's enough. Some days it isn't. He paused. But he's never, in 22 years, done anything to someone who didn't know what they were getting into. Except you. Another pause. And that's kept him up more than anything I've ever seen keep him up, and I've seen a lot. She took the key card. Thank you, Caruso. He nodded once, got in the car, drove. She stood on the sidewalk with the key card in her hand and the wind pushing at her back and Chicago moving around her in every direction. And she thought about her father, about a man who had pulled a stranger out of a burning building without asking what the stranger was, had filed a complaint about fraud because the bridges people crossed every day needed to actually hold weight, had kept his mouth shut for 14 years, and died on an interstate in weather that might not have been weather. Daniel Vail had believed that evidence had weight, that truth, properly documented, could move things that seemed immovable. He hadn't been wrong, he'd just been too early and too alone. She wasn't either of those things anymore. She started walking. Come. The hotel was good. Better than she needed, which was probably intentional. Luca DeLuca's version of an apology expressed in thread count and room service and a view of Michigan Avenue that went on long enough to make the city feel comprehensible from a sufficient height. She didn't feel guilty about accepting it. She was past the point where guilt was a productive use of energy. She slept for 11 hours. No dreams, just the thick, absolute unconsciousness of a body that had been running on emergency reserves for too long and had finally, in a room with a locked door and no one trying to put it in a river, been allowed to stop. She woke at 6 in the morning with full daylight coming through the curtains and her ribs still aching and her head clear for the first time in what felt like a geological era. She lay on her back and took inventory. Her name was Sienna Vail. She was 31 years old. She had a degree from Northwestern and a master's from Zurich, and 7 years of professional work that existed in the records of the firms and clients she'd served, whether or not the administrative records had been temporarily altered. She had a father who was dead and a mother who had been dead longer, and no siblings and no living family she could name, which was a hard arithmetic but not a new one. She'd been alone before the crash, and she knew how to work in that condition. She had cracked ribs that would heal in 6 to 8 weeks. She had a memory that was returning in the incremental, nonlinear way that neurological recovery worked, not like a photograph developing, but like a city coming out of fog. Sections clarifying, then more sections, the familiar shapes of a life becoming recognizable again 1 block at a time. She had Delgado's card on the nightstand and a testimony to give in 8 months, and a legal process to sustain herself through that would require her to be present and coherent and credible. She had 17 pages of architectural drawings and a sketch pad at Luca's estate that she would need to retrieve at some point because they were hers and because the work in them was good. She had enough. She got up, showered carefully around her ribs, dressed in the clothes that had been left in the room. Her actual clothes, she realized, the ones from her apartment. Someone had been to her apartment. And went down to the lobby and ate breakfast at a table by the window and watched Chicago go about its morning. She went to her apartment that afternoon. It was on the 3rd floor of a building in Lincoln Park. She remembered the address the morning she woke up in the hotel, the full address arriving in her memory like a street coming into focus through fog, sudden and complete. The key was in her personal effects from the hospital, still in the plastic bag with the other items that had survived the river. The apartment was exactly what she expected from a woman she was only partially remembering. Spare, functional, organized with the precision of someone who spent their professional life imposing structure on complex systems. A drafting table by the window, a full set of technical drawing instruments in a mahogany case, bookshelves with architecture texts and engineering references, and she noticed 3 novels, all thick, all heavily annotated in the margins. The drafting table had an unfinished project on it, a set of plans she'd been working on before the crash. She stood over them and looked at what she'd been doing. It was a community center, not a corporate project, a pro bono commission for a neighborhood organization on the South Side, a mixed-use space designed around safety and accessibility, with integrated security architecture that made the building genuinely protective without making it feel institutional, the kind of design that understood security as care rather than control. She sat down at the drafting table and picked up a pencil. Her hands moved. Not from recovered memory this time, from choice. Deliberate, present, fully conscious. She looked at the plans and saw what was missing and began to add it. And the work was good. And the work was hers. And for the first time in as long as she could calculate, the thing in her hands was something she was making instead of something she was surviving. She worked until dark. Luca came to find her 3 weeks later. She knew he would. She didn't know exactly when, but she'd understood from the shape of everything that had happened between them that it wasn't finished. Not cleanly, not yet. There were things that had been said and things that hadn't, and both categories required acknowledgement before the ledger could close. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked different, not older, worn in a different way. The controlled stillness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, the way a building shifts after a significant load event, the structure intact, the internal stresses redistributed. He was wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, and he wasn't wearing the careful social armor that he'd worn in the hospital, in the estate. He looked like a man who had recently had several lengthy conversations with federal prosecutors and had emerged from them with a clarified understanding of what he had and hadn't done, and what that cost. "I'm not going to ask to come in," he said. "You can come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the apartment, the drafting table, the books, the plans pinned to the wall. He took it in with the attentive thoroughness she recognized as his standard mode of occupying a space. "The community center," he said. "I'm finishing it. It's good work." "I know." He turned to look at her. They were standing in her kitchen with the drafting table visible through the doorway and the city outside the window and the specific quiet of a conversation that both people have been building toward for 3 weeks. "The cooperation agreement," she said. "How much exposure?" "Significant. 3 years suspended with full asset disclosure and a 5-year compliance monitoring arrangement." He said it the same way he said everything, directly, without softening it. "The organization is effectively dissolved. The people who worked for me have been given full immunity in exchange for testimony. Caruso is opening a security consulting firm." A brief pause. "He asked if I thought you'd consult." Something moved in her chest. Not quite amusement. Closer to the recognition that life had a persistent, aggravating tendency to continue regardless of how much dramatic weight it was currently carrying. "Tell him maybe?" she said. Luca nodded. "Victor?" she said. "Indicted on 7 federal counts. The trial is scheduled for 14 months from now. His legal team is attempting to negotiate a plea, but Delgado isn't interested in what they're offering." He paused. "Colton has entered a cooperation agreement of his own. He's testifying against his father in exchange for reduced charges on the obstruction count." "He'll still serve time?" "He'll still serve time." She absorbed that, not with satisfaction. Satisfaction was too clean an emotion for what she felt about Colton Mercer. It was more like the sensation of a weight being properly set down after being carried at the wrong angle for too long. "My father," she said. "Delgado's team found the contractor who received the payment. He's cooperating. The I-90 incident is being reclassified." Luca's voice was careful here. Not emotional. Careful, which for him was the same as emotional. "There's going to be a formal acknowledgement. A legal finding. It won't be—" He stopped. "It won't bring him back," she said. "No. But it'll be true. In the record. What happened to him will be true in the official record." "Yes." She looked at the window. The city at night, the lake invisible beyond the buildings but present in the quality of the air, the iron cold that came off it and moved through everything. Her father had believed that truth had weight, had spent 14 years wondering if he'd been wrong about that, had died without knowing. He hadn't been wrong. She turned back to Luca. "You should know," she said, "that I understand why you did what you did. I don't mean I accept it. I mean I understand the architecture of it, the logic, the structure, how the pieces fit together. You needed someone who could carry the evidence without being connected to you, who had legitimate professional standing, who had a personal stake in the outcome that was real and not manufactured, who would take it to the right place and be believed when they got there." She held his gaze. "I was the correct choice, functionally. That doesn't mean you were right." "No," he said. "It doesn't. You built something around me without telling me what it was. You made decisions about my risk on my behalf without my knowledge. The fact that you were trying to honor a debt to my father while doing it doesn't change what it was." "I know. And the fact that I walked out of it alive and with more than I went in with doesn't change it either." "I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had watched over her from a distance for 8 years and had finally, when she was at her most vulnerable, moved in close, and had done it for reasons that were partly his, and partly hers, and partly her dead father's, and partly the compound interest of a debt that had been accumulating since a South Side warehouse in a different century. He was not a simple thing. She had understood that from the first night in the hospital. He was a man made of competing obligations and genuine capability and real damage, and he'd used all three of those things in ways that had cost her more than he'd had the right to spend, and he was standing in her kitchen not asking to be forgiven, which was the most honest thing she could say about him. "I'm not going to tell you to leave Chicago," she said, "and I'm not going to tell you we're finished, but I need you to understand that whatever comes next, if anything comes next, it starts from here, from what actually happened, not from the story that makes it more palatable." "All right," he said, "no debt, no obligation, no 8-year history of watching from a distance while telling yourself it was protection." She kept her voice even. "If you want to know me, you do it as yourself, not as someone repaying something to a dead man." He was quiet for a long time. "That's fair," he said. "It's not about fair. It's about what I can work with." He nodded once, the gesture of a man who understood the difference between being forgiven and being given a place to stand and was willing to take the latter without asking for the former. "I'm going to go," he said. "I have a meeting with Delgado's office at 8 tomorrow." "I know, she told me." He almost smiled, the ghost of it, the one that never fully arrived. "You're going to be a very thorough witness." "I'm a very thorough person." He turned toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, not looking back, just stopping. She'd learned by now that this was how he processed the things he needed to say but hadn't planned for, the brief pause before the unguarded thing. "Your father," he said, "the day he pulled my grandfather out. My grandfather asked him, afterward, why he'd risked his life for a stranger. And your father said he didn't think about it long enough for it to be a risk. He just saw a person who needed help and moved toward them." Sienna looked at the drafting table, the community center plans, the South Side neighborhood where the building would go, the same part of the city where her father had filed a fraud complaint and been put in a burning warehouse and had moved toward a stranger anyway. "That sounds like him," she said. Although she didn't remember him saying it, she just knew it was true. Luca left. The door closed quietly behind him. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, then she went to the drafting table and sat down and turned on the lamp and looked at the community center plans. The security architecture was the part she'd been refining. Not surveillance. That was the wrong word for what she designed now, the wrong concept entirely. What she built was awareness. Systems that made a space safe, not by treating everyone inside it as a potential threat, but by knowing the difference between a door opening and a door being forced, between a person moving and a person being moved against their will. The distinction was everything. She'd spent 7 years learning to build the distinction into the bones of a building. She picked up the pencil. The work was detailed and slow and required everything she had: full attention, full knowledge, the complete technical competence of a person who had built security systems across 3 countries and survived having them used against her and come out the other side, understanding them more completely than before. She worked through the plans methodically, floor by floor, making small corrections and larger refinements, and the city moved outside the window and the night deepened and the lake sat out there in the dark, enormous and cold and absolutely indifferent to everything that had happened in and around and because of it. At midnight, she set the pencil down and looked at what she'd done. The plans were good. The building would be good. It would stand in a neighborhood that needed exactly this kind of structure. A place designed from the foundation up to protect the people inside it, not by excluding the world, but by creating a space strong enough to absorb what the world sent and hold. She thought about her father one more time, about the complaint he'd filed and the silence he'd kept and the life he'd lived in the space between those 2 acts, about the bridge that was supposed to be rehabilitated and wasn't, and the people who'd crossed it anyway because they needed to get to the other side and didn't know the weight-bearing calculations had been falsified. He'd known. He'd filed the report, and when the system swallowed the report and handed him back silence, he'd kept living, kept doing the work, kept checking the bridges, kept being the person who moved toward a stranger in a burning building without thinking about it long enough for it to be a risk. That was the whole inheritance, not the debt Luca's family had been carrying. not the evidence she'd extracted from a network she'd built without knowing what it was for. The real inheritance was simpler and harder and required no documentation. A man who believed that doing the right thing had value even when the system disagreed, and who had kept believing it until the day someone decided his belief was too expensive to allow. She was going to finish his sentence, not the one that had been cut short on the I-90 in weather that wasn't weather, the longer one, the one that had started with a fraud complaint filed in good faith and continued with a stranger pulled from a burning building and gone on, quietly, in the bones of every bridge and building he'd ever reviewed, every structure he'd certified as sound because it actually was, that sentence. The one that said, the work matters. The truth has weight. You do it anyway. She was going to build a community center on the south side that would stand for 60 years and protect the people inside it and bear the load it was designed to bear. And she was going to testify in federal court in 14 months with complete technical precision about everything she'd found and how she'd found it, and she was going to rebuild her professional practice and her name and the administrative record of her existence in this city, and she was going to do all of it without owing anyone anything and without anyone owing her. The debt was done. She'd said it to Luca, and she'd meant it, and she meant it now, alone in her apartment at midnight, with the plans in front of her and the city outside the window. She turned off the lamp. The room went dark except for the ambient light of the city coming through the glass, the orange and white of 10,000 lives running simultaneously in every direction, the restless, unsentimentally alive quality of Chicago at midnight that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her and would go on exactly the same regardless of what she did with it. She'd do something with it anyway. She went to the window and stood there for a moment, looking at the skyline. The towers she hadn't designed and the tower she had, visible from here if you knew where to look, its upper frame still exposed against the sky, still unfinished, the skeleton of a building waiting for its skin. She'd see it finished. She didn't know in what capacity, not as a Mercer project, which was over, but the structure itself was sound, and Chicago needed the square footage and someone would complete it eventually. Maybe she'd be involved, maybe she wouldn't. The future had a way of unfolding on a schedule she couldn't draft in advance. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold. Real. The city on the other side of it going about its night. Then she let her hand drop, and she turned from the window, and she went to bed. And she slept without dreaming of bridges or rivers or the calm face of a man behind a rain-soaked windshield, because the dead don't need dreaming about when you've already done for them the only thing the living can do, made sure the truth of what happened to them exists, properly documented, in the permanent record. It was enough. It was, after everything, exactly enough.